This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy is created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
People have so much to gain and have such an imperial motive for putting a position on them. We'll never let the true facts come of their lords to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now, these people are very hard to
We're back. And the last thing I think I forgot to clarify in my rant about Brett Ratner that might have been obvious to some listeners is that, Al Malnick basically raised him as his son, and there's always been a little bit of speculation and rumblings that perhaps he really is Al Malnick's son. And because he impregnated a teenager, his friend was like, I'll say that my son got her knocked up or something, which might explain why he was never in his life. And Al Malnick was. Maybe a little bit like another person who will pop up near the end, Barack Obama. Kind of a similar situation, maybe. But anyways, moving on here. Now we're going to talk about Paradise Island. So I'm going to read a little bit from the passage, opening chapter 2, because boy, do we get some familiar names popping up. So he writes, the development of Paradise Island is quite different than that of Freeport, although the end result was quite similar. Freeport was wilderness until Wallace Groves put his stamp on it. Industrial development was his first thought, with casino gambling in partnership with the Lansky Syndicate, a late, and for Groves, perhaps bitter outcome. Freeport's uniqueness was based on the incredibly generous Hawksbill Creek Agreement, which granted political and economic autonomy to Groves, Luchesler, and their associates. Paradise Island, on the other hand, was a private reserve for the extraordinarily wealthy. Its owner in the post-war period was a Swedish billionaire, Axel Wenner-Gren, with ties to the Nazi Party. Toward the end of his life, he gave some thought to developing it, but sold it instead to an American millionaire with a yen for art and unorthodox sex. Not the first such millionaire to move to the Caribbean with that kind of attitude. The second owner tried to turn the island into the kind of place he himself would visit, and thus spent most of his fortune building an exquisite white elephant resort. In desperation, he turned to Meyer Lansky, hoping he would help him recoup his millions by getting him a certificate of exemption. It didn't work out for him in the end, but the course for Paradise Island was set. The little island is 4 miles long, and at most 2/3 of a mile wide. Called Hog Island for centuries, it forms one side of a channel somewhat less than 1/2 mile in width. The southern channel borders part of Nassau City. So, in the post-war period, 80% of the island was owned by the extraordinarily rich and controversial Wenner-Gren. His home, Shangri-La, sat on 30 flowered acres near a small lake which connected to a canal running the width of the island. Shangri-La was a famous estate, and Wenner-Gren entertained numerous well-known and powerful industrial, financial, and political figures, including in 1960, UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld. I think we discussed before maybe having his plane get blown up in Africa in the early 60s. So right before that, he was hanging out with Wenner-Gren.
Right,
Interesting. Yeah. I guess they were both Swedish, so there's that. But Wenner-Gren had invited the UN secretary to his home to discuss UN support for a university of human values that Wenner-Gren wished to establish in Cuernavaca, Mexico. There was something ironic about this, however. Wenner-Gren was suspected by many to be a long-term Nazi and so-called Aryan idealist. Born in Uddevalla, Sweden in 1881, Wenner-Gren made a fortune estimated in the late 50s to be worth well over $1 billion. His money derived from the Electrolux vacuum cleaner, developed by Swedish engineers from an American model for Wenner-Gren and aggressively marketed worldwide. Wenner-Gren was as industrially expansive as D.K. Ludwig, At the opening of the 1960s, he owned transportation companies in West Germany and the U.S., finance and real estate firms in Mexico, harbor and road construction enterprises in the Bahamas, electronic factories and firms in Sweden, and one of the world's largest electric power ventures, located on 40,000 square miles of British Columbian territory, to be developed at a recorded cost of $611 million. Wenner-Gren was unlike the private Ludwig. He was outgoing, gregarious, and exceptionally philanthropic. We talked a little bit previously about his anthropological society that was kind of looking for weird Bigfoot stuff.
Yeah, we
right?
went down quite an Axel Wenner-Gren rabbit hole. What
Ask Wenner.
Ask Wenner about it. Right.
The Ask Wenner memo was in the Bigfoot episode, and we brought him up.
Later on, but we didn't realize, or we didn't make the connection that it could be referring to Axel Wenner-Gren.
We thought, us neophytes thought that maybe it was a misspelling of Werner, like Werner von Braun, but it turns out we just had the wrong Nazi.
Yes.
And it was maybe more Wenner-Gren. Of course, I think we mentioned him in the Disney episode. He built the Disneyland monorail, of course. And was also good friends with the...
some completely, not super Bigfoot related episode that it came
It was
up.
you know what it was? It was the Che episode, because there were rumors. There were the rumors that the little boat that Fidel Castro secured for his, revolutionaries to sail across and start their insurgency was somehow sold to them by Axel Wenner-Gren, or the boat was owned by him, which we were kind of scratching our heads at of what the fuck was Axel Wenner-Gren up to?
And
going
around trying to find out what it was. We came across his anthropological work in Peru, searching for lost cities and
exactly.
and
so once again, another Nazi
Bigfoot
on the Grawl quest, basically. So now we get to World War II. Very interesting time for him. Wenner-Gren stepped down as the head of Electrolux in 1939 with the outbreak of war in Europe and sailed off to the Bahamas on his yacht, the 335-foot Southern Cross, purchased from Howard Hughes. Interesting.
Awesome.
He'll come up later. On the way, he rescued some 400 passengers from the torpedoed British liner Athenian. His life-saving action in the Athenia case, as well as numerous philanthropic endeavors, and his later work to create a university of human values, stand in stark contrast to his involvement with and support for German militarism. Just a few years after the Athenia went down, and only months after the U.S. officially declared war on Germany, Wenner-Gren was blacklisted by the United States. He was placed on the proclaimed list in January 1942 in order to limit his financial activities in the Western Hemisphere. There was concern he was able to, quote, penetrate the economies of countries like Mexico and would use his considerable influence for the Axis. There was ample reason to suspect Wenner-Gren of Axis sympathies. He had been one of Hermann Goering's close confidants before and during the war, working with him to secure a steady oil supply for the German Navy, and more importantly, helping, quote, to render Mexico a debtor republic that could be relied upon to be an ally in time of war, to the mechanism of the German Import-Export Corporation in Mexico City. Additionally, Wenner-Gren was involved in various pro-Nazi schemes with an American collaborator, the oil magnate William Rhodes Davis, who was in the thick of Nazi petroleum ventures. Okay. After the war, from the splendid comfort of Shangri-La, Wenner-Gren labored to economically and socially rehabilitate the notorious Alfred von Krupp, shout out to Jimmy, Germany's munitions master.
Yeah.
In the mid-1950s, von Krupp and his wife, Vera, were guests at the Bahamian estate, and there planned the family's rebirth. Wenner-Gren, quote, had sworn that he was ready for one more mighty lunge toward the Grail, which had fascinated him since youth, a German Europe. Yo, okay, he said it, not us. He became the key conspirator in a complicated plan to enable Krupp to reacquire the family's munitions empire seized following Germany's defeat. It was in the midst of his plotting the restoration of the Krupp Empire that Wenner-Gren and one of his associates, Arne Lindroth, thought about developing Hog Island. They contacted the New York accounting firm of Horwath and Horwath, hiring it to work up a feasibility study on resort development. The report had several development options from the simple to the grand. For unknown reasons, Wenner-Gren decided not to proceed. A few years later, in 1960, he sold his portion of Hog Island for $14 million to American millionaire George Huntington Hartford II, better known as Huntington Hartford, heir to the great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, the A&P grocery chain Fortune. The following year, Wenner-Gren died. Yeah, so this guy is literally like, we're picking back up with the hereditary, Gustavus Meyer's hereditary fortunes. This is one of those like second, third era descendants, Huntington Hartford. So this is interesting too. The year after Huntington Hartford buys it, Wenner-Gren dies. His death produced a great mystery. His vast estate had been looted. One result was the curious spectacle in the Bahamas of his widow selling her furniture and paintings at auction to raise needed cash. So big question mark as to like where all of his money went, right? Maybe into like Martin Bormann's secret bank accounts.
Maybe.
But anyways, Huntington Hartford, grandson of the founder of the A&P chain, changed the name of the island to Paradise and then transformed it into a resort for the wealthy. He was an educated and aesthetically minded man. He graduated from Harvard College in 1934 and spent a considerable part of his fortune and time on artistic matters, acquiring a fine collection of contemporary art and a commitment to the theater. In the summer of 1948, he formed a company to bankroll theatrical productions. Later, he became a member of the National Council of the Arts in Washington and owner of a well-known modern art gallery in New York, which he built to house and exhibit his private collection. Now, this guy is a major alert. Tell me if he sounds familiar. Not the name, but like, tell me if this guy's vibe sounds familiar. Working with Hartford on all his projects since 1945 as a general assistant and factotum was Seymour Cy Alter from New York. They were very close friends, but markedly different in taste and temperament. Hartford was elegant and refined. Alter was coarse, vulgar, and gruff. Hartford's factotum was born in 1922 and served in the military during World War II. Following the war, while his relationship with Hartford deepened, he worked as a private investigator, garage manager, and garment manufacturer. Finally, he co-managed a liquor store called Bermuda Wines, which was owned by Hartford. Licensed in the winter of 1958, Bermuda Wines would shortly embroil Alter in a New York corruption scandal. Now, this is the part where I say, does this remind you? Such close but diverse personalities sparked vivid speculation about the bond between them once they arrived together in the Bahamas. It was widely believed, and often stated, that Alter helped arrange sexual liaisons for Hartford, whose tastes were considered somewhat peculiar. Those convinced of this arrangement, which would have an impact on Hartford's future in the Bahamas, thought it started in New York when Alter was in the detective business and Hartford owned a modeling agency. Alter controlled much of Hartford's life, screening all his visitors. Hartford told people in the Bahamas that Alter was his bodyguard and let it go at that. Few believed him. Most thought Alter was blackmailing him, a classic case of a pimp's rise to power. Alter had a deserved reputation as a corrupter. In fact, while Hartford's development of Paradise Island was proceeding, Alter, as the manager of Bermuda Wines, was called before a New York State grand jury investigating corruption in the state liquor authority. Granted immunity from prosecution, he testified about graft offered to SLA officials in order to stop them from closing the store for several violations of the state liquor code. Alter tried to fix the problem by calling upon a politically connected attorney. A few days later, his lawyer said $25,000 would take care of everything. Alter contacted others with influence and arranged to fly SLA people, including the commissioner, to Paradise Island as his guest. But before the deal was finalized, the investigation became public and the scheme fell apart. The worried SLA commissioner told him that he could no longer help. He even asked Alter if he could get him a job in the Bahamas. Damn, okay, so I mean, I'm getting strong Epstein vibes from this guy, Cy Alter, in the sense of, like, almost like Epstein's relationship with Les Wexner, where you have, like, a wealthier guy who already has a bunch of money, and then he forms, like, a weird relationship with this rando from New York who seems to have incredible power over him. And, I mean, in the case, like, Epstein was more, like, I guess, to some extent, like, satisfying his own sick desires, though Wexner is probably complicit in that, but also, like, engaging in blackmail and, like, kind of, like, acting like this pimp to, like, the upper class kind of thing. So, yeah, very interesting. And so Hartford spent millions on a small and lovely hotel, the Ocean Club, an expensive nightclub, and roads, sewage, water facilities, and street lighting, he rebuilt and remodeled the Wenner-Gren estate. The attractive nightclub had been the caretaker's house. Another part of the hotel was constructed from Wenner-Gren's own home. The Ocean Club was then painted the color of luscious strawberry ice cream. It was surrounded by palm trees, interspersed with exquisite fish ponds. On the grounds, Hartford used imported stone from a Spanish cloister built in the early Middle Ages and reassembled in a magnificent formal garden. Dotting the garden were wonderful statues culled from his private collection. Hartford's dream resort devoured money, much like Groves initially did. Groves, however, was a master at using other people's money. Hartford wasn't. The A&P heir spent his own. Thus, by 1963, he had gone through about $24 million. All the work was exquisitely done, and the final product was truly beautiful, but the resort couldn't make it. It was expensive, small, remote, just the ticket for the very rich, but Hartford's investment required a volume trade. The Ocean Club had only 50 rooms, so there was simply not enough business to break even. Hartford sought financial salvation through casino gambling. He vainly tried to secure a certificate of exemption. In preparation for this, he turned to the Lansky mob, using Al Malnick as one of the principal intermediaries. The effort was wasted, though. Hartford applied for a casino license in April 1963, only a couple weeks after Groves received his for Bahama Amusements. His application was summarily turned down, rejected the very next day. Mindful of Groves' recent good fortune, Hartford referred to it in his petition. On that issue, the colonial secretary dryly replied, "The certificate recently granted to Grand Bahama Amusements set no precedent. It was experimental." As far as casino gambling was concerned, Hartford was out. There seemed nothing to be done, no way for him to rectify what turned out to have been major political gaffes, which were the cause of the government's enmity. Now, this is first of all, his unusual sexual proclivities were rumored to have disgusted and angered Sir Stafford Sands. Second, disgusted or not, Sands was still the man to consult over the delicate issue of a certificate of exemption. Instead, Hartford had retained the firms of Higgs and Johnson, who were capable attorneys but not in the same league as Sands. His final mistake was perhaps the most serious. He supported the Progressive Liberal Party in its 1962 run against the Bay Street Boys and their newly formed United Bahamian Party. Out of a sense of idealism, he donated $15,000 to the Black PLP for the 1962 election. Such virtue was perceived by the Bay Street Boys as little short of racial and political treason. Okay, so he was like a flamboyant, crazy, kind of like wealthy liberal who, almost in a way, kind of like the Kennedys, thought like, you know what, like maybe we should give like some civil rights to like black people. And then they found out real fucking quick that like that's not appreciated and it's seen as racial and political treason by the white people. Yeah, so there were political changes, kind
what
of
were
like
his unusual sexual proclivities.
That's the thing, they don't specify. Like I assume that it doesn't just mean that he was gay, because I feel like Alan A. Block would specify that. If that's what they're getting at.
Footnote at the end of this chat.
But like to say his unusual proclivities and it disgusted and angered Sir Stafford Sands, and he also owned a modeling agency, like that was the beginning of this like weird relationship they had. So it sounds kind of like Cy Alter, also LOL, like his last name is like Alter, like extremely sus, like Psyop Alter. Anyways, he sounds like he was like a procurer for Huntington Hartford. And since he owned a modeling agency, I'm assuming probably this is a modeling agency for women, right? Mm-hmm. I feel like maybe he would have specified otherwise.
Yeah,
I'm getting
it's a modeling agency, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't gay.
No, he could have been bisexual or whatever, but
I think that even today, like a lot of people who work in the modeling industry, men who work in the modeling industry aren't straight. Like even if they're kind of like procurers in some way.
That's true, but I'm also thinking of like Jean-Luc Brunel and Jeffrey Epstein and Trump, for that matter, all of whom owned model agencies, and at least 2 out of 3 used those as a pretext for like recruiting and grooming women. Even though I'm sure a lot of the people like running the modeling stuff are like gay men, but you know, the people that own the agency.
I guess his unusual sexual proclivities could be like, I guess in Jeffrey Epstein's case, like I don't know if his like Trump would be considered to have unusual sexual proclivities, except when he's like talking about how his daughter is so attractive and shit like that. Like what's unusual about Epstein is that he's like a pedophile.
That's exactly the same unusual proclivity of Jean-Luc Brunel as well.
Yeah.
And Ghislaine Maxwell, who also gets kind of connected tangentially to this whole network. So it's hard for me not to read into unusual sexual proclivities, as he had a penchant for young girls, or maybe young boys too, but like people that were underage, because it's hard to imagine. I don't know. Otherwise, if it was just
Trump
that he was gay,
also did have the unusual sexual proclivity of being spanked by Stormy Daniels with Forbes magazine, allegedly. So never mind.
But that doesn't even that only kind of counted after he became Trump and became president and all this shit. Like even before he was more, I don't know, unless a lot of those allegations about him and Epstein.
Yeah, I mean, it's not that
true.
Weird. It's like a little bit strange.
But regardless, I mean, he's only saying it about Huntington Hartford. It doesn't matter what other people's proclivities were or were not. Like it sounds like people that we know have run modeling agencies and were pedophile predators. It sounds there's many similarities between Huntington Hartford's kind of situation, especially the hushed outrage over his activities seem to be of a magnitude that might sound like it's like some kind of pedophilia thing going on.
Maybe. However, like the fact that someone was outraged by it, that's almost what makes me more skeptical that maybe it is like homosexuality or something, because I feel like Sir Stafford Sands might not be as upset, especially like at that time, like over that. Unless it was like, really young kids. Like, given this is the 60s, like maybe that is the case, that he was bringing in like rent boys all the time. Because I think also we have to say, like, it sounds like his relationship with Cy Hirsch was like kind of like a pimp. Like, I'm going to go out and procure like people to like have sex for money or for other things. Brunel. Right.
No. I'm talking about Huntington Hartford and Cy Alter.
Oh, Cy Alter. Yeah, okay. Because you said Cy.
Yeah.
I say. Yeah.
Like he said, he was a pimp basically.
Right.
Is how Block
don't want to
kind of describes him.
Cy Hirsch. Whatever you might say.
Oh, sorry. Oh, did I say Cy Hirsch? My bad.
I mean, another famous Cy. Yeah.
See, few believed Alter when he said he was his bodyguard. Most thought Alter was blackmailing him, a classic case of a pimp's rise to power. So he also could have been blackmailing him, which again in those days could have been just homosexuality. But I don't know. Like I think we don't know either way. But it seems like Huntington Hartford was into some like kind of freaky shit, either whether it was gay or not, and it might have been the kind of thing that would be illegal. And also, I think the part of the reason people like had a distaste for him is because I think he was relatively kind of open and like flagrant about, I don't know, having wild parties and stuff, almost like a little bit like how Epstein was getting before he got popped, like kind of really like barely even trying to hide it, like just sort of doing this thing out in the open. And there's kind of like, dude, stop, like you're gonna make us all like look bad, if you keep doing this shit. Anyways, but then he had the liberal impulse to give to like the local black PLP party, and all the other white silk toppers hated him for it. And so they end up kind of screwing him in general. Yeah, he talks here a little bit about how Hartford had stepped over a dangerous political and social line in the Bahamas, and thus was shut out of the other political games. And there was nothing he could do to get his casino certificate, though he tried several times. So he tried to like plead with the government to he submitted plans for a 500-room hotel with a casino and said, no, I'll actually build 1,000 rooms. He said he offered to have Hilton Hotels International operate the hotel and casino. Alan Block concludes they kept saying no, and he was trapped in paradise. So while Hartford was left to stew and spend, others interested in Paradise Island came forward. Now, here's a company we've heard of before. Within 14 months, one particular group, an amalgam of new players from the Mary Carter Paint Company, joined by Groves and other Freeport veterans, was easily able to secure a certificate of exemption for a new casino on Paradise Island. What Hartford could never accomplish was done with ease. Hartford, however, still had to be dealt with, as he owned most of the island. Therefore, he was cut in at the start of the deal and for a few years after. It was not a relationship he relished, especially after he discovered his new partners were cheating him. Eventually, he was left in the cold. So, in the pre-Bahama days, Mary Carter Paint Company was a small New Jersey paint company which displayed slow but steady growth. It had expanded basically into Florida, started in 1950. They had a manufacturing plant in Tampa, had 63 stores, and Mary Carter's earning potential in this time attracted the interest of James M. Crosby, a young investment banker and former stockbroker. Crosby was then working for financier Gustav Ring, a one-time construction magnate in Washington, D.C. One of Crosby's first jobs for Ring was the acquisition of the Unexcelled Chemical Company. Ring rewarded Crosby's success by making him the chemical firm's president. Crosby tried to interest his boss in the paint company, but was turned down. He looked elsewhere for capital, contacting his father, John M. Crosby, a lawyer and once an assistant attorney general in the administration of Woodrow Wilson and major Wall Street trader. So yeah, this is James M. Crosby of Resorts International. We've mentioned him before. Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny, to my shame. I feel like when I looked him up years ago, I kind of just assumed he was like he didn't come from like a really fancy line, because I don't know why that I thought like Crosby was like an Irish name. But then, thinking back to like our Laurel Canyon episodes, no, it's not. Because David Crosby, we know that David Crosby, the famous musician, comes from like multiple lines of like old Dutch like families that like literally founded New Amsterdam and shit. So I haven't done the necessary research, but I'd probably be willing to bet that the family of John M. Crosby and James M. Crosby are probably a branch of those Crosbys, if you know what I'm saying. Yeah. And, they're already in the Wilson administration, major Wall Street traders. So, this is the guy that ends up running.
Yeah, I don't think Crosby is a Dutch name, but it definitely could be an English name. Yeah.
I think that's what it... honestly, at the end of the day, all these family, if you go back that far and you're like that, you have that substantial of a lineage, you're definitely like Anglo-Dutch, because I don't think there's any families that have like just intermarried between the Dutch ones. Like they're all kind of blended.
Yeah.
Like,
although I feel really, like there's definitely some that are more like predominantly Dutch.
Yeah, for sure.
And the surnames kind of have some significance.
Like the Roosevelts are a good example of that, because they're Delanos, they are Whitneys, they're Roosevelts, like they're a couple of different things.
And it gets more homogenous the further back you go. Like nowadays, like no one gives a shit. Like if you're Dutch or if you're English, like, but further back in time, like the more.
Yeah, and it primarily mattered like because of the family, because of patroonship and the economic dominance that like the colonial Dutch had.
Yeah.
They were even able to.
In the United States, it's like the beginning of like the sort of sympathy between the two. Like the beginning of the Anglo-Dutch tendency is really like in that kind of colonial situation.
So really, when we talk about like high WASPs, we're really talking about like people of like English and Dutch and maybe to a lesser extent like French extraction, I think usually. Yeah. With a little bit of people like mixed in, like other types of people maybe mixed in. Maybe there's a little Scotch-Irish here and there, but generally not, they were like the wrong type of white people. But yeah, so yeah, Crosby, already this is a guy who ends up basically running this company. It's sort of like both a front for the CIA and the Lansky Syndicate. Is not, some scuzzy, like working class, like criminal guy. He's like a white shoe Wall Street investment dude who I think, I don't know if he went to Harvard or went to Yale, but like from, the son of a assistant attorney general in the Wilson administration. So, heavy hitters, like very respectable bankers, right? Mm-hmm. So when he told his dad, John M. Crosby, about, I guess, buying Mary Carter Paint Company, the idea appealed to John Crosby. He used a firm called Crosby Miller to work the arrangement. Crosby Miller had developed over the years from the Schaefer Manufacturing Company of Wisconsin, and John Crosby bought half the firm in 1955. Shortly thereafter, Crosby Miller appeared. In anticipation of the purchase of Mary Carter Paint, Crosby Miller authorized a large increase in shares. Most of the subscribers were members of the Crosby family. Outside investors included the famous writer and commentator Lowell Thomas, who bought about 5%, and former New York State Governor and Republican presidential candidate Thomas E. Dewey, who held less than 3%. Dewey was brought into Crosby Miller by stockbroker Richard C. Pistel, later sanctioned by the Securities and Exchange Commission for violations. Pistel was close to Jim Crosby, and in time with Robert Vesco, working on many of his ventures, beginning with Unexcelled Chemical. In fact, this early association produced a momentary rift between Dewey and broker Pistel, which provides some insight in the character of both men. They're basically just doing like shady robber baron stock schemes at each other, but they were able to resolve their problems. This is actually funny. Pistel sent Dewey a crude political joke in the form of a mock press release dated June 5th, 1985, which Governor Dewey thoroughly enjoyed. This is proof of their, I guess, friendship. And he wrote, ironically, President Ted Kennedy commented today on the Russian occupation and fortification of Long Island, the Panama Canal, and the southern tip of Florida, said, "We are watching these developments carefully and have sent a stiff note of protest to Moscow." Congresswoman Caroline Kennedy and Richard King, son of evangelist Martin Luther King, were married today. The ceremony was performed by Chief Justice of the Supreme Court Frank Sinatra. The happy couple will leave tomorrow on a 6-month honeymoon in the Congo. Secretary of Labor Mike Quill announced his retirement today and will be replaced by Teamsters President Jimmy Hoffa. Wow. So they're just... okay.
This is neither here nor there, but one day, to make a note, we should definitely do like an episode about like the Anglo-Dutch Wars and like King William. Yeah, I guess he was king, right, of England, William III, William of Orange, and like all that shit. It's like interesting and crazy.
I think it echoes to the present day to some degree.
Like Anglo-Dutch rivalry. I mean, also there's like just so much intermixing, I guess, between them, but also like a weird relationship, like just the fact that there was like, you know, this like Dutch stadtholder who was like on the British throne.
Oh, I see. Interesting.
Yeah, and like the, you know, the Glorious Revolution and everything. Like I think that was like kind of like a Dutch like proxy conflict, like in some way, or like that. I think that they were like kind of like sponsored by Dutch people or by the Netherlands, like from abroad. But yeah, this is one funny anecdote. Let me see if I can find it. I mean, it's a huge digression, so maybe it's not worth it. But
I think maybe we might, in the interest of time, want to keep.
All right.
But interesting thing to come back to later.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So they got an infusion of capital into Crosby Miller, and it was time to act. So they bought in 1958. Crosby Miller bought 80% of Mary Carter for $2.48 million. When all the various details were settled, Crosby Miller had become the Mary Carter Paint Company. However desirable and robust the paint company looked in the late 50s to the Crosbys and Pistel, it soon must have appeared slightly anemic. Apparently, the market share of Mary Carter had been eroding, and so as a consequence, they looked for new investments. The watchword was diversification. After some discussion about buying Kentucky Fried Chicken, the paint company entered the fast food market, buying the assets of the Biff Burger chain. Mary Carter Paint next determined to get into the land development business. It was intrigued by Bahamas Developers Limited, which owned property in the Freeport area. This firm had a serious cash flow problem in 1962 and was afraid it couldn't meet the first mortgage payments on the land. It was looking for help. Attorney Olson passed the word to Jim Crosby. Before long, Mary Carter acquired the development company through an exchange of stock. The exchange took place in May 1963, and when completed, Mary Carter owned 1,300 acres near Freeport. And let's see, so now they had land with like good beaches. Yeah, but actually the site they first bought like never really got developed and did anything. But once bitten by the Bahamian real estate bug, Mary Carter was in for more. About a year later, Attorney Olson had another deal. His friend and past client, Huntington Hartford, wanted to sell 3/4 of Paradise Island. Olson called Crosby with the news, which aroused his interest. A meeting was held among Olson, a desperate Hartford, Cabinet Minister Robert Simonet, and Stafford Sands. During this meeting, Sands suggested a gambling license could be had for Paradise Island. It must have infuriated Hartford to hear this, for Sands described Hartford's last proposal with a few important additions. For one, a bridge would have to be built, and also the Freeport Group would have to be given minority interests. One final condition, galling for Hartford, held the buyer was required to retain the services of Sands in its attempt to obtain a certificate of exemption. So the paint company agreed, and in 1965 placed Sands on the payroll and applied for a gambling license and got the bridge financing moving through a private company headed by Crosby. In 1966, it bought a 75% interest in Paradise Island from Hartford for $12.5 million, and they created a bunch of companies to take over Paradise. Sands created 3 interlocking firms, Paradise Island Limited, Paradise Realty Limited, and Paradise Enterprises Limited, to basically acquire the land, to build the casino, and to manage the casino. This placed Mary Carter Paint and Wallace Groves together. Groves would control 4/9 of the Paradise Island operations, Mary Carter the rest. Huntington Hartford, who still retained 25% of the island, was effectively isolated with a minority interest in one of the 3 companies established by Sands. He also had a very insecure entitlement of 12.5% of casino profits. There was another turn in the complex of companies that brought Bahamas Amusements very close to Paradise Island. Groves gave the Amusements Company, which I think we already established is like the Meyer-Lansky connected one, responsibility for financing Paradise Realty and for managing Paradise Enterprises. So in the mid-'60s, it was like well on its way. So Lou Chesler, Big Boy Lou, Wallace Groves, they're all brought in. They signed the agreements. Yeah, they actually bought out the Bahamian Club. They bought out Mackenzie from Providence, Rhode Island. Oh, yeah, there was another wealthy heiress, Mrs. Shirley Oakes Butler, who wanted to buy the club for $2.7 million and planned to donate a substantial portion of the casino's profits to local charities, but her shit got rejected, and instead they accepted the offer of the Mary Carter Paint Company. They were not going to donate a lot of money to charity, I think we can say. Oh yeah, here's something worth noting about Wallace Groves. Yeah, with the government-backed arrangements between Mary Carter Paint Company and Freeport developers to open up Paradise Island, Groves was surely riding high. In addition, he was strategically placed and important enough to be contacted by the Central Intelligence Agency, which needed his help. This must have been quite flattering for the ex-con. On December 30th, 1965, there was an internal CIA request for a covert security approval to allow Groves to work as, quote, an advisor or possible officer for a project probably involving Cuba. This was approved in April 1966. Groves worked for the agency for the next 6 years. His operational interest to the Investigations and Support Division of the CIA ended in the spring of 1972. So that's cool. So literally he became like just a CIA asset doing top secret shit, conquering the wilderness of Grand Bahama Island and actually building Freeport, preparing to enter Nassau and Paradise Island, and working in covert operations with the CIA were milestones of achievement for Groves, each marking in its way the distance covered from his swindling and prison days. But within the year, he would face a publicity barrage, which had the potential to undermine much that he had accomplished and to bring back troubling memories of the past. The times had changed, and none recognized this more completely, argued crime writer Hank Messick, than Meyer-Lansky. He and his associates set out to capture Pindling, thereby recovering from the financial consequences of the Cuban debacle. They knew what it meant to be on the wrong side of history, and were not about to sit back and lose out as political change swept the nation. Far better to cut new deals with Pindling, that's the local opposition politician, and the Progressive Liberal Party crowd, helping sweep the Bay Street Boys out, then be forced out themselves. It was chancy and dangerous, but eventually it would be done. So eventually they got into a relationship with Pindling, who was one of the leaders of the Black Party that was trying to dislodge the Bay Street Boys. So Lansky basically switched sides and decided, okay, well, let's just bring them in on the take instead of getting totally kicked out. So I guess they had learned from their Cuba experience that sometimes you don't just want to hang on to the hated ruling class. Yeah, there was a scandal involving Groves, I think bribing them. But then we basically get, in the late 60s, the transformation of the Mary Carter Paint Company into Resorts International, which I guess, was basically what Mary Carter Paint Company turned into. And I guess that was also a big focus of the IRS Tradewinds investigation. They're trying to really trace all the tentacles of Resorts. He notes here that around the time in the early 80s, Resorts was in the process of expansion to Atlantic City, New Jersey. The Casino Gaming Act in the Garden State, which allowed New Jersey to withhold a gambling license from persons associated with organized crime, became the last best hope to know whether those who helped create Resorts were mobsters and their associates or not. And I guess they were able, because they did open a resort in Atlantic City, they were able to slide by that. So the funds amassed to finance the Paradise Island ventures amounted to about $33 million. Of that sum, at least 63% appeared to come from or through, quote, funny money sources, some directly related to organized crime, Castle Bank, and subsequently Robert Vesco. Mary Carter turned to several companies, individuals, and brokerage firms when it was ready for the big push. Two in particular stand out when considering organized crime. The first is a Bahamian bank called Fiduciary Trust, and the second, Delafield & Delafield, a well-known and respected New York brokerage house. They did a lot of shady accounting with these different firms to get funding. Yeah, he talks about the Investors Overseas Service, which I guess was it was one of the world's largest mutual funds, but I guess it eventually sort of collapsed in scandal and corruption, and was used for a lot of like shady financing for projects like this. I might just skip over this, but yeah, there is a mention here of Dr. Tibor Rosenbaum, one of organized crime Swiss bankers. I do believe that Tibor Rosenbaum had a certain kind of relationship with President Tubman of Liberia in like the 50s and the 60s. And he was also kind of tangentially connected to these kind of networks. Yeah, Malnick comes up again. He's kind of involved in a lot of these like financing arrangements. Pullman, the gangster, and Malnick was recorded by Canadian police in 1966 talking about their investments. They were partners in many enterprises, including the Bank of World Commerce. Yeah, Malnick went over Pullman's complicated finances involving several firms in fairly obscure foreign banks. Some people owed Pullman money, including Fat Tony Salerno from East Harlem in South Florida. In addition to tax problems, they talked about buying a small Paris casino. Later, the police listened as Pullman discussed the Paris casino with Morris Landsberg, the owner of the plush Eden Rock Hotel, another Lansky associate. So iOS and the Lansky Syndicate were very tight. However, iOS did maintain some degree of independence. Tibor Rosenbaum was advising them. And this bank connected to all that fiduciary had 2 rounds with Mary Carter and Resorts. They took $100,000 of Resorts or Mary Carter's promissory notes in 1966. The clients of the Fiduciary Growth Fund, totally owned by Louis Chesler's son, Allan, and the Troconis Family Trust, whose principal beneficiary was the family of William Mellon Hitchcock. So, okay, now we got to talk about, like, at some point, William Mellon Hitchcock gets involved in this Mary Carter Paint Company, Resorts International. Another example of, like, this isn't just mobsters we're talking about. This is, like, real silk topper hours down in the Caribbean. So he writes that stockbroker William Mellon Hitchcock is an American original. He's the grandson of William Larimer Hitchcock, founder of Gulf Oil, and the nephew of Andrew Mellon, whose fortune in the 1920s was somewhere between $1 and $2 billion. Andrew Mellon was ranked second to John D. Rockefeller in power, wealth, and influence in the whole country, wrote Cleveland Amory in his Chronicle of the American Aristocracy. But Billy Hitchcock marched to a more complicated tune than the industrial tycoons in his family. He reached for both an emotional and aesthetic experience nurtured by LSD, as well as the more traditional reverie brought on by conquering the boardrooms of Wall Street. His quest for internal enlightenment was helped by a substantial inheritance and trust fund that provided him with $15,000 per week in spending money. Damn. That money enabled him, that money enabled him to bankroll the manufacture and distribution of LSD. Originally turned on to acid by his sister, the director of the New York branch of Timothy Leary's International Federation for Internal Freedom, IF, Billy Hitchcock gave one of the family's estates to Leary as a center and playground for psychedelic fun and games. Leary, the nation's best-known apostle of LSD, disbanded the Federation and replaced it with something called the Castalia Foundation once he was in place at the Hitchcock spread in Millbrook, New York. The Millbrook experience, according to researchers Martin Lee and Bruce Schlane, was like a fairy tale. The Hitchcock mansion was transformed into a Victorian ashram. Psychedelic art mixed with Persian carpets, dark woods, and crystal chandeliers. Several dozen acid trippers moved in and, quote, people stayed up all night tripping and prancing around the estate. Some dropped acid for 10 days straight. Even the children and the dogs were said to have taken LSD. Why are you giving kids LSD? That's us. Courtney Love alert. What the fuck?
Yeah, very MK Ultra, but also like MK Ultra for dogs apparently too.
Just really, I mean, I was shocked that I didn't realize there was a whole LSD fucking angle to this book, but it really does tie together kind of like everything we've ever talked about.
Yes. This is a crazy portion of the book for sure.
It is, and the direct like interlocks with like the sussest shit, and yeah. Okay, so he goes on. Although a devotee of LSD and Leary, Hitchcock retained a certain aloofness from the more frenetic acid trippers. He stayed at Millbrook, but chose to live away from the mansion in a sumptuous cottage. From there, he carried on with business, keeping in close contact with investors and brokers. He spent mornings on the phone talking with Bahamian and Swiss bankers, setting up meetings and fast money deals. Those who visited him at Millbrook from the financial world were invariably and routinely turned on. Damn. Yeah. The party at Millbrook lasted until 1967 when Leary left for California. By that time, the Hitchcock estate was being fought over by 3 different bizarre acid sects, including one called the Neo-American Boohoo Church. I hadn't heard that before. It was also constantly watched by the New York State Police. Billy Hitchcock decided to leave, and after evicting all the freaks, left for Sausalito, a few miles north of San Francisco. That's also where Stuart Brand lives on his little houseboat. You know, like right on the coastline of Marin County, not far from the Golden Gate Bridge. Really, one of the richest areas in the Bay Area and in the country. A lot of old money up there. So it was then that Hitchcock decided to underwrite 2 amateur chemists, Nick Sand and Tim Scully, in the manufacture of LSD, STP, and other hallucinogens. They relied upon a most remarkable group known as the Brotherhood of Eternal Love to distribute the drugs. Incorporated in California as a tax-exempt religious entity in October 1966. Damn, is that the same month as the Church of Satan was incorporated? I think so. Like,
yes,
literally.
I think so.
Like Halloween 1966.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, we've talked about the Brotherhood of Eternal Love before, haven't we?
A little bit, yeah. I forget which one, which episode, but Tim Leary kind of went down to like Orange County with them.
Yeah, this is an incredibly sus group.
He says right here, you know, incorporated as a tax-exempt religious entity in October 66, the Brotherhood really was a segment of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. All right. Very cool, Hunter Thompson, etc. Jack booted and adorned with various Nazi symbols, the Angels added a savage touch to the new church, whose avowed purpose was to achieve a heightened awareness of God, love, and wisdom through the teachings of prophets and wise men, including Christ, Buddha, Ramakrishna, Yogananda, and Mahatma Gandhi. Oh, so they're pacifists. They settled south of L.A. at Laguna Beach, right? Considered something of an artist's colony. Getting in touch with God and one's spiritual essence, they felt, was immeasurably aided by large doses of LSD and other drugs. Supported by Guru Leary and his California incarnation, the tax-exempt zealots of the Brotherhood ran the largest illicit LSD ring in the world. The deal between the Brotherhood and the manufacturers was made at Hitchcock's Sausalito home. With the organization set, Hitchcock, mimicking his industrial forebear... Now, I'm going to read that again because it's so fucking good. Okay? Because, this guy's a hippie. What? He has nothing to do with his grandfather who, ran a huge industrial company, right? Mm-hmm. The deal between the Brotherhood and the manufacturers made at the Sausalito home. With the organization set, Hitchcock, mimicking his industrial forebears, proceeded to rationalize the manufacturing process. He bought property in a small Northern California town and set his chemists to work with new equipment. His arrangement with Sand and Scully called for him to keep them on very modest $12,000 yearly retainers. They were turned loose in the laboratory, eager to concoct the best LSD ever. Within 6 months, they had turned out at least 10 million hits of the soon-to-be famous acid called Orange Sunshine. Hitchcock and Sand went to the Bahamas in the spring of 1968 in preparation for an expected economic bonanza. They stayed with Sam Clapp, who had been one of Hitchcock's college pals. A secret account for the LSD chemist was established at Fiduciary Trust. The acid entrepreneurs were also in the Bahamas to scout locations for a possible offshore LSD laboratory. The family of Mary Carter Paint investors from iOS and its affiliates who had connections to Billy Hitchcock was extensive. There was Seymour Lazar, who described himself as a personal associate of Bernie Kornfeld and a friend of Billy Hitchcock. Lazar, called by California acid cronies the Head, also worked with Big Lou Chesler. In 1967, Lazar bought $84,000 worth of Class A Mary Carter Paint shares in a private placement. According to the SEC in a later investigation, Lazar and Jim Crosby's friend and broker Richard Pistel engaged in security violations for which they were punished in 1973. There was also Fred Alger and his 2 mutual fund firms, the Alger Fund and Security Equity Fund. The Alger Fund sunk $2.5 million and Security Equity another $950,000 into Mary Carter Paint. This fund was directly related to iOS at this time, and Alger's investments were apparently worked out in negotiations with Clapp, Hitchcock, and Jim Crosby. While Hitchcock worked his LSD wonders, he was also a registered securities broker, employed first by Lehman Brothers, R.I.P., and then with the venerable brokerage house of Delafield and Delafield. That financial institution played a key role in the Mary Carter Paint transformation. One of the large transactions handled by Delafield, for instance, involved several companies owned by a fabulously wealthy Greek shipping family named Goulandris. The Goulandris companies, registered in Panama, invested over $4.5 million in the paint company. So getting lots of money from interesting places. Sam Clapp's wife, by the way, was barred by the SEC in the summer of 1968 for more funny business with Mary Carter stock. There's another guy named J.J. Frankel, who I guess was even more out of control than Hitchcock's LSD syndicate buddies, who committed suicide or was murdered, as his wife claims, in November 1983 by falling out of the window in his Park Avenue apartment. He had a hand in at least $12 million of the $33 million, which went into Resorts International. But he participated in the biggest transaction of all, the $10.5 million deal paid to Mary Carter for the paint division itself. This was the moment when Mary Carter became a, quote, leisure industry company called Resorts International. This guy actually very bizarre. Okay, I just want to read a little bit about this guy's bio because, again, kind of interesting. Joseph Jacob Frankel was born in Staten Island in 1937. He went to a New York prep school, went to college for a few years. He was first noticed by outsiders in the late 1950s when he was excused from mandatory military service in order to participate in the Eastern European Cultural Exchange Program under the sponsorship of the U.S. State Department. He traveled in both the USSR and Romania. This experience, which convinced some that JJ was an occasional agent for American intelligence, led directly to his becoming a junior impresario in the foreign film industry. He made a substantial contribution to cinematic history by importing the great Soviet film about World War II, Ballad of a Soldier. So again, we go with like weird, like might be an intelligence guy running around Eastern Europe and ends up working in Hollywood. Like he imports Soviet movies over. Just kind of interesting. So he had extensive racketeer connections. He was allied with Fat Tony Salerno in a Bahamian corporation called Seafarrow, which manufactured cement-bottomed boats. Yeah, in one particularly serious situation, his activities unmasked another individual, Joel Mallon, tied to the mob, Resorts International, and Castle Bank. This occurred after an organized crime homicide in New York had sparked an investigation into Automated Ticket Systems Limited, a vending machine company with a suspiciously lucrative contract to supply New York State with lottery tickets. So, yeah, anyways, they were involved in all kinds of shit.
A little bit of a backtrack, but I think I may have solved our Huntington Hartford issue here.
Oh, okay.
I did find a obituary written about him by a friend of his, I guess, Robert Temple. Okay. He says, "This is the obituary the London Independent newspaper commissioned for me by my friend Hunt, but refused to publish." So it goes on about him like at length, you know, and how when he was a young man, he was thought to be the most eligible bachelor in America, etc., because of his A&P fortune and everything. So this is a key passage here. Hunt employed a very nice and amusing fellow named Larry Horn to look after him, who had a particularly charming wife whom Hunt, like a true gentleman, never tried to seduce. Larry was completely honest, seriously normal and straightforward, and kept Hunt out of trouble. If Hunt left wads of cash lying around carelessly, he would hand them to him and never pocket anything. Larry and I speculated about Hunt's satiromania, now called, since Michael Douglas, quote-unquote, sex addiction. If Hunt exasperated Larry beyond what he could bear, Larry would call him an F slur. This was how to wound and silence Hunt and make him behave. Larry's theory was that Hunt was so terrified that he might secretly be gay that he couldn't stop sleeping with girls compulsively, lest he suddenly realized that he might really be a bisexual and go to pieces. So this guy's theory is that he was a closeted sex addict who was trying to escape being gay by ravenously having sex with people all the time.
Interesting. Okay, so more like kind of like a Hunter Biden, like in the closet guy acting out like
another Hunt, everything.
True,
on the Hunt. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense because I guess he would be like in the Psi-Alpha relationship, he would be the procurer. So, I mean, but it seems like he did have a lot of sex anyway, and would just constantly be trying to seduce people. But maybe those kind of rumors were part of it. But I mean, I guess also it could just be that he constantly had a ton of sex.
Yeah.
You know.
Here, actually, interesting to that, just continuing scrolling down here, that after talking a lot about the activities of the financing the bridge, which I guess even involved like Bebe Rebozo and like Richard, like payoffs to Richard Nixon and shit like that. He writes that no one was angrier and more suspicious about Resort's bridge activities than Huntington Hartford, who was still a company director in Paradise Island Limited. In a suit filed in 1973, Hartford charged Resorts International with forcing him out of Paradise Island. He demanded a court order declaring the bridge to be a corporate asset belonging to Paradise Island Limited and asking for a proper accounting of the bridge's revenues and expenses. Hartford was convinced Resorts was operating the bridge to the detriment of Paradise Island Limited, the only part of the complex in which he still held an interest. Hartford's anger and his insistence on an accounting of bridge receipts were stimulated to some degree by the malice of his former associate, Cy Alter, who would switch sides and allegiances. After betraying Hartford, he had become an insider close to Crosby, in particular I.G. Davis. A Resorts employee noted Alter was always hanging around the Davis office, reminding him of some repulsive dog. The office used to start before breakfast, he stated, and Cy would come to sit across from I.G. Davis's secretary, hacking, spitting, coughing, belching, until the poor girl would flee to another part of the building or to the washroom to be sick. Damn. So they got his sicko pimp and got him to turn sides. Alter also held important posts at Resorts, which were apparently off the books. There was also a claim from Tradewinds agents that Alter really managed the Paradise Island Bridge Company from the time it was built until recently. It was Alter's connection to the bridge which convinced some investigators that Nixon was being paid off with the bridge receipts. They knew Alter was quite friendly with Bebe Rebozo and that he had accounts at Rebozo's Key Biscayne Bank. Suspicion was immeasurably increased when they learned Alter had actually hand-delivered some cash deposits to Rebozo outside normal banking hours. Yikes. Now, this part has some real gold. Resorts International had a predilection for funny money, often connected to organized crime associates. It also had a preoccupation with corporate security. In 1967, Crosby convinced Robert D. Peliquin, the Department of Justice attorney who had been investigating organized crime in the Bahamas and written an embarrassing memo about Lansky, and William G. Hundley, formerly Peliquin's boss, as head of the Organized Crime and Racketeering section of the Justice Department, to join their new team. With the financial backing of Resorts, Intertel Inc., standing for International Intelligence Incorporated, was formed. So yeah, actually, he mentioned earlier that Robert D. Peliquin was I think either an FBI agent or a DOJ official that had written this memo that got out that was connecting all of this shit in the Bahamas with Meyer Lansky. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it pissed them off because they're like, oh, what the fuck? They missed, they didn't pay off the right people, and that thing got out and embarrassed them. But then they just went and they literally went to the guy who wrote the report and was the investigator, when he left government, and they're like, yo, you want to run our private security company? And they got it. And so he ended up being the head of Intertel, which is a crazy private intelligence network. He writes that Intertel's primary job, so it was said, was to keep mobsters away from Resorts International. Interestingly enough, however, Sally Woodruff, the informant, found a company with the same name incorporated in New York in 1962, which must have been an organized crime enterprise of some type aimed at the Bahamas. Its officers were publicists Tex McCrary and Lansky Syndicate gamblers Frank Ritter and Max Courtney, two of the men who ran the Monte Carlo casino. The coincidence perplexed Sally, who also had discovered Peliquin's new company used the Bahamian cable, telex, and postal address of the original Intertel. So, yeah, they just recycled the name of a mafia front company, but they're there to stop the mafia from being involved. Very cool. So the progress of Resorts Intertel was spectacular. In addition to security for Paradise Island, its client list by 1971 included most of the Howard Hughes Hotel and Casino empire in Nevada. That year, Intertel performed security and detective work for several Fortune 500 industrial and communication companies, as well as international financial firms. Intertel then had offices in the Bahamas, Washington, New York, Toronto, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. Specialists from almost every important law enforcement and intelligence service were on Intertel's staff from the start. Secret Service, Customs Border Patrol, New York and LAPD, Department of State, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Interpol, FBI, Federal Bureau of Narcotics, CIA, NSA, and IRS were just some of their former employers. Clearly, Intertel hired prominent security officers and former chiefs, several with exceptional political experience and contacts. So yeah, that was basically this kind of private mercenary outfit that kept things safe and also did manage Howard Hughes' security, which is maybe we'll get to that in a sec. But yeah, very shadowy organization. Paradise Island, which emerged from the Aryan grip of Wenner-Gren and the effete one of Huntington Hartford, took great pains at all times to rhetorically distance itself from criminality. Oh yeah, okay, we have the Howard Hughes shit in Chapter 4. Okay, this is interesting actually. Howard Hughes, in the early 70s, almost buys Paradise Island. But this is a very bizarre story. basically, I think in maybe 1969 or 1970, that Howard Hughes retained Intertel. Hiring Intertel in 1970 was one step in a process of changing the billionaire's palace guard. The battle for control of Hughes and his fortune was arranged and skillfully managed by a cadre of executives known as the Mormon Mafia. This force was led by Bill Gay, Chester Davis, and Raymond Holliday, who headed the Hughes Tool Company, the empire's foundation. Their enemy in the struggle for mastery over Hughes was Robert Mayhew, the ex-director of security, who was also in charge of the Nevada casino operations. Mayhew was a former FBI agent and CIA operative directly involved in the agency's plan to murder Fidel Castro. The Mormons manipulated the result of a fractious split between Mayhew and the codeine-addicted Hughes. It was the Mormon Mafia which hired Intertel to replace Mayhew and thereby set off major sparks in Nevada and later the Bahamas. That's interesting. We'll circle back to the Mormon Mafia. Maybe we mentioned them in our Carl Oglesby Yankee Cowboy episode with all that weird shit about Howard Hughes. And like Robert Mayhew, I mean, he popped up kind of connected like the RFK assassination. He's like extremely sus, but interesting that he's on the opposite side.
Into Howard Hughes, I would want to. Like one day we should maybe even go deeper.
I think
there's a lot there. Yeah.
No, for sure. This is just a brief kind of like glimpse into like Hughes in this time period when he gets Resorts International's, security firm to protect him. I guess like the Mormons were down with that. So interesting. The other thing that like the Mormon Mafia told Peliquin when they met with him, they didn't just want security, but Mayhew was going to be ousted, and Hughes was leaving Nevada. He was departing, unnerved over the Atomic Energy Commission's continuing nuclear tests in Nevada. For a man paranoid about common germs, Hughes was near apoplexy, thinking about radiation. One reason for his disenchantment with Mayhew supposedly stemmed from Mayhew's inability to convince President Nixon, the recipient of cash payoffs from Hughes totaling $200,000, which were amassed by Rebozo, to stop the AEC testing program. Hughes determined to go to the Bahamas after eliminating Mexico and Puerto Rico from consideration. He was prepared to leave in August 1970 and settle on Paradise Island. So they rented out like 2 floors in different Paradise Island hotels for his use, but he was thinking apparently of buying the entire island. Because he was so irrational, the Bahamian adventure was almost scuttled when he learned that 66 tons of lethal nerve gas, 1/9 of the Pentagon's entire poisonous stockpile, was about to be sunk into the ocean about 150 miles from Paradise Island. It was a terrible nightmare for Hughes, and he immediately commanded his forces to stop it, no matter the cost. This demand was conveyed to President Nixon, already living in dread whenever contemplating Hughes for a variety of reasons, especially the sensible one that the disguised bribery would be disclosed. Indeed, the previous month, the Hughes executive had slipped $50,000 in cash, the second half of the payoff, to Rebozo, who placed the money in a safe deposit box in Key Biscayne Bank. So I guess, he tried to get Nixon to not dump like the biological weapons stockpile in the ocean, but he was unable to. And the poison gas terrified Hughes, but other matters in Las Vegas scared him even more. And on November 25th, the nearly emaciated and unbelievably filthy billionaire left for the Bahamas. He was carried on a stretcher from his Vegas penthouse and flown to the Bahamas in one of his jets. And so I guess the American consul, Lou Crossan, was there to meet him. One of Nixon's former Secret Service officers who worked for Intertel, Jim Golden, was also there. And this is bizarre. Like, when it was time for Hughes to actually leave the plane, Golden requested, the Intertel guy, requested both Crossan and Pierre to turn around and walk away from the plane, keeping their backs to the scene. They complied without any reported complaint, and the American consul heard what he thought was a wheelchair moving and then a van rumbling away. Hughes was finally carried to a darkened penthouse bedroom in the Britannia Beach Hotel on Paradise Island. So his routine was the same as in Las Vegas. He neither bathed, shaved, cut his finger or nails, dressed, nor left his self-imposed prison. He watched movies day and night over and over again. Daily needs were attended by very few trusted aides and consisted of codeine shots, a little food, and enemas. While Hughes existed within this sad, mad reverie, the political world was laying the foundation for its own St. Vitus dance. Forces rotated around the fixed point of the living skeleton in cyclonic fashion. So this is weird because later it's going to come up that people think that Howard Hughes is actually dead and they like his Mormon mafia handlers were like covering it up, which is why they said like you have to turn around, like you can't, because they ended up getting in this big fight. I think the IRS, this becomes part of Operation Tradewinds. They try to track down Howard Hughes because I guess he owes a bunch of tax money, and they can't get confirmation that like anybody's actually seen Howard Hughes on Paradise Island, even though he's allegedly there. And they eventually, I think, caught him on like a refueling stop on his plane, and he, I guess, was alive.
Yeah.
But the thing was, if IRS
big, recluse, right?
Really big recluse,
not someone who was looking to be seen if he could avoid it.
Yeah, I think the fight over it was that they, like, if they couldn't get proof of life, basically, they could declare him dead and move to collect millions in estate taxes unless he shows himself. So this is like the main Jaffe, the main investigator, kind of like the real true detective of the story, who we're not really discussing due to time constraints, but he was hot on this trail, and so that was what he was trying to do, was to like get Howard Hughes to like literally show himself to settle some tax disputes and shit. And yeah, it got pretty far. Howard Hughes also like kind of wanted to fly off to like Nicaragua for a while, because I guess he was friends with Anastasio Somoza. But then something happened in Nicaragua that like triggered his OCD, and he decided to leave. I forget if it was like, I don't know if it was the earthquake. That was it. Yeah, there was a devastating earthquake in 1972. And like Howard Hughes was like, fuck this is sus, like I'm leaving. And that's how he got like caught in Fort Lauderdale by the IRS. And they forced him to, I don't know, talk or whatever. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff here about Robert Lee Vesco as well, who kind of got caught up in all of this, and he was deeply involved in the Investors Overseas Service, which we mentioned was he and Progressive Liberal Party members were in so many conspiracies they appeared permanent criminal partners, a new Bahamian criminal cartel. Vesco supported his subversion of government and people with millions of stolen money. He engaged in one of the boldest financial crimes of the era, targeting Bernie Kornfeld's mutual fund, IOS, in all its permutations. The fund was constructed by Kornfeld on the backs and dreams of an army of salesmen literally tramping the world, helping the financially nervous from several tottering nations. The 60s was a decade of the big push. To the thousands of metaphysically inclined brokers, nothing could contain the inevitable growth of Investors Overseas Service. They deluded themselves and many others, believing iOS was an expression of a stock market that could only rise. Honestly, this is like some crypto NFT shit that like they all got involved in the 60s, and it ended up with, I think it was kind of a pyramid scheme. It was like a kind of a boiler room pyramid scheme type thing, where they would go out with these like basically either with like over the phone stock operators or door-to-door salesmen would go and sell these like these kind of mutual fund securities. But then there was a deal where like you got to buy them at a discount. Like the more you sold as a salesman, like the more you got to buy at a discount. So you're kind of profiting. So, you know, classic pyramid scheme shit that all kind of collapsed, I think around like 1969 or 1970. It was financially connected to all of these like kind of mob people. And Robert Vesco, you know, he grew up in Detroit. Yeah, this is actually kind of weird. Yeah, he had worked as like a manufacturer's executive, kind of not like a real like notable guy or anything like that. But then I guess he got addicted to business. Like he got addicted to like buying and trading stocks and like buying ownership in companies. And he writes that he still had much to learn, but fortunately he found his first significant mentor in Malcolm Evans McAlpin, a suave, tweedy Princeton graduate and stockbroker with a seat on the New York Exchange. McAlpin was almost 30 years older than Vesco. His impressive experience and style enabled him to teach Vesco how to behave around bankers and others with cash at hand. It was a hasty course in entrepreneurial etiquette. Now, I actually looked in that, and maybe I'll cut this part out, but it is kind of funny. So Malcolm Evans McAlpin is one of like the grandchildren of the kind of McAlpin, the great McAlpin fortune of New York, which I think started as a tobacco company and then broke off into like hotels. They built the Hotel McAlpin, which was I think maybe like the most expensive hotel like in America at the time, like around during the Gilded Age. And they owned these like huge brownstone mansions in Manhattan that were like next door to some of the Vanderbilts. Like I said, I might cut this, but it is funny. Do you want to know, you know what I found?
What'd you find?
I found that Malcolm Evans McAlpin is the first cousin, just straight first cousin of a woman named Nancy McAlpin Bell, who is the second wife of a certain dirtbag podcaster's grandfather.
Oh, okay.
I mean, that's a very tangential connection, but it just shows to show you the milieus that some of these people run in.
Okay.
Yeah. So not a real familial connection, but it's just like, yeah, so her first cousin was Robert Vesco's like WASP mentor in how to like talk to like fancy people with money and like con them. So, and of course he was a man of Princeton and all this kind of shit. So I don't know what the deal is with like Vesco kind of, also the really weird thing about Vesco that doesn't get talked about a lot in this book is I think ultimately when all of his frauds like collapsed, he fled to Cuba, like, communist Cuba. Yeah. And I think he stayed there for the rest of his life. So like, I don't know, he got burned real hard. Vesco got all up into New Jersey politics. And I think he definitely had a tangential connection to like the whole Watergate scandal. Like he was associates with a bunch of like Nixon loyalists. And I think got into some weird financial arrangements with Donald and Edward Nixon, Richard's two brothers. Oh yeah, Don, the president's nephew, Donald Nixon Jr., like became a hippie after being in the military, and this distressed the Nixon family, so they called up a private eye who was serving on the White House Special Investigations Unit to bring Don out of the hippie commune hills. He went and like got him and dragged him back to Washington and had him sit down with John Ehrlichman, who, oh yeah, this is what happened. Yeah, so like they wanted to get Don away from like being a hippie, so they offered him kind of like a weird sus like no-show job with Robert Vesco. And so John Ehrlichman like sat him down and was like, look, like you're going to cut your fucking hair and you're going to take this like corrupt job and you're just going to like make a bunch of money and shut the fuck up and stuff. And also like told him, yeah, he said Ehrlichman told him of the Vesco offer, urged him to take it, cautioned him to behave, and warned him to tell people he was working for Straub and not Vesco. Discretion was not part of Don's temperament, and he told anyone interested that he was a Vesco man. So yeah, I think that ended up popping up during Watergate. Then Vesco made a critically important alliance in 1968 with a Bahamian bank run by Allan C. Butler in Nassau. Born in Cambridge in 1926, Butler attended Harvard and then Johns Hopkins, training for a career in international banking. In 1958, he got a job at the First National Bank of Boston, where that sus Ukrainian guy worked. A short while later, he was in the Bahamas, anxious to have his own bank. And then in Nassau, he married Shirley Oakes, the second daughter of the very wealthy Sir Harry Oakes. Sir Harry had discovered Canada's largest gold deposits and was the richest baronet in the British Empire. He headed for the Bahamas at the tail end of the 30s when his Canadian taxes reached about $3 million a year. An early developer of the Bahamas, Oakes was mysteriously murdered in his beautiful Nassau home in 1943. The Oakes children, Shirley and two others, inherited money and extensive land holdings on New Providence Island, including most of the center of Old Nassau. It was Shirley's inheritance.
By the way.
Sorry, Nassau. Yeah. I don't know anything Nassau. Yeah, Nassau.
No yeah.
So yeah, Shirley's the one earlier that we mentioned wanted to buy the Bahamian. She wanted to buy the Bahamian Club and like donate the profits to charity, and they were like no. So. But then her inheritance was used to provide the capital her husband needed to form Butler's Bank in the early 60s. And the bank was the centerpiece in a growing Butler conglomerate of local businesses under the corporate name General Bahamian Companies. And Butler's Bank was used by Vesco for many parts of his iOS looting scheme. Okay, sorry. I think I misspoke earlier. Vesco looted iOS, which was a shady company. Like, he sort of, like, attacked it and, like, drained all the money out of it and stuff, and sucked it into his own system. So, yeah, again, all these people, they're all fucking interlocked. And let's see, mentions that Vesco's chief lieutenant in Geneva was Milton F. Meisner, holder of a PhD and a former Rhodes Scholar who had met Vesco years earlier at Olin Mathieson. So, yeah, he's got Rhodes Scholars, obviously CIA agents working for him. We can kind of skip over, I think, the attack, like a lot of this Vesco stuff. It is interesting, but, oh yeah, he was also met up with let me see, is this another Canadian motherfucker? Yes, it is. Okay, so he took on another associate who became second only to the boss in villainy. This was Norman LeBlanc, a French-Canadian and 1958 graduate of McGill University in Montreal. LeBlanc was an accountant employed at the Paris office of Coopers & Lybrand, one of the world's largest accounting firms. When he met Vesco, Coopers & Lybrand moved LeBlanc to Geneva in 1970 to work with iOS on various deals, but then he became Vesco's confederate. LeBlanc's accounting talents were enhanced by his links to Canadian racketeers, some involved in the international drug trade. This would later become known when Sam Paroff, an informant shared by the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and Customs Service, stumbled onto LeBlanc's and more significantly Vesco's Canadian heroin connection. So I guess they were involved in massive heroin smuggling, and Vesco was supposed to provide $300,000 to buy 100 kilos of heroin in Europe. And this guy Paroff reported, he was basically an informant, I guess, and he reported Vesco's name, but then he felt he was in jeopardy. He believed government agents who he told that shit to were in league with Vesco and the Canadians and attempted to have him murdered. Thoroughly frightened and understandably suspicious of law enforcement, he searched for help, and I guess he went to a Senate committee, and maybe that's how it got a little bit worked into Watergate. Okay, now this is interesting. Okay, so in the midst of this orgy of corruption, Vesco is a supreme juggler with an ever-increasing number of companies, politicians, mobsters twirling in the air. While perfecting his Bahamian alliances, stealing everything not bolted down, he was also constantly trying to block the SEC probe. It had tentatively started in January 1971 and was officially ordered 3 months later. Vesco tried bribery, intimidation, and legal fouderall to check the commission, but nothing worked. Barely 2 months after the inquiry opened, he had Sears write Attorney General Mitchell for help. This was the connection that expertly handled the Swiss problem, and Vesco couldn't quite grasp its difficulties with the SEC. Sears initially asked Mitchell to lean on SEC Chairman William Casey, later President Reagan's CIA chief. Yeah, he was the SEC chairman in the early 70s when a lot of this shit was popping off. Yes. Subsequently, Casey met several times with one of Vesco's lawyers, but was unwilling to do more than listen. Casey and Vesco were not strangers to one another. In fact, they had a business connection, which Casey preferred to keep quiet, involving a firm called Multiponics. It had been founded in 1968 to perfect hydroponic farming, soilless agriculture. Casey was the largest investor, legal counsel, and corporate secretary. Vesco, one of the largest investors. Multiponics, which owned around 40,000 acres, principally in Louisiana, went bankrupt like so many companies touched by Vesco. An inquiry into its failure indicated some shoddy practices on Casey's part. Weird. Why the fuck is Casey investing in hydroponic farming shit? I
don't know.
So fucking weird.
Maybe he thought it was a good racket. Yeah.
I guess he had his fingers in all kinds of things back then. Yeah, including... Okay, so Vesco then... I think all this culminates basically in 1972. Vesco, in amidst this orgy of criminality, tries to buy Resorts International and is like, I want to buy it. He announces this in 1972. His interest, apparently, in acquiring Paradise Island was stirred by stockbroker Richard Pistel, the early booster of Crosby Miller, then Mary Carter Paint, finally Resorts International. A close friend of Crosby's, Pistel, had been one of the money movers finding investors for the original Mary Carter Resorts amalgamation. He had a large block of resort stock stemming in part from shares in its predecessors. Vesco also must have had a healthy share of resorts through his grab of iOS, which was a major resort investor, primarily through the Hinky Fiduciary Trust. So Pistel, the ultimate insider, was Resort's major negotiator in the Vesco deal, someone working both sides of the street. It basically ends up not happening. They did bargain back and forth, but there were other suitors, including still a Howard Hughes, just lounging around in his darkened chamber on the island, and they thought maybe he'll buy the thing, but that didn't end up happening. And you know what happened? Finally, interestingly, the SEC filed a civil fraud complaint against Vesco in the federal district court in Manhattan, and that tanks Vesco's chances of buying Resorts because Resorts can't afford to publicly deal with him anymore. Also, weirdly around the same time, they were kind of happy it failed because suddenly the Bahamian government's attitude started to change against Resorts and wanted to open, basically allow it to expand and all these other things. Yeah, I was a little disturbed here to read that at the time, Resorts' earnings for the year really were hinging on how well their Marine World theme park located close to San Francisco did. I used to go to Marine World when I was a kid. I didn't know it was a fucking Resorts International theme park.
No.
That was like a little shocking to read. I was like, no, not Marine World. Like it was kind of like a zoo / theme park.
Right. I feel like Marine World like had other controversies too, didn't it? Like it's kind of like a worse SeaWorld.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like a knockoff fucking SeaWorld.
Yeah, it's, of course, because it's like a front company.
Yeah. So then I guess, Vesco starts to catch up with him in the mid-70s. He also got involved in some weird shit during the Carter administration. He moved munitions, drugs, and money around the world and tried to corrupt the Carter administration, including using some kind of Libyan gambit, where Vesco worked out a 3-way deal for the release of planes paid for by Gaddafi, but embargoed by the State Department. When Libya was sanctioned as a terrorist state, the arrangement called for Vesco and certain members of the Carter administration to split $15 million paid by the Libyans who would finally get their planes. And he had partnered with Major Abdul Salam Jaloud, who is Gaddafi's deputy, the number 3 man in the government. They met in the Bahamas. 2 planes were released, but then it got kind of blown up by a Senate report. And they kind of back up. And it says, now, even though Vesco currently lives in Cuba, under the protection of the Cuban intelligence service, his real home still seems to be the Bahamas. So yeah, I don't know like what the fuck the deal is kind of with that. I doubt he politically defected, but maybe there were a few people like that, like shady international business people that maybe he shared secrets with Cuba or something like that in exchange for asylum. But damn, we haven't even gotten to Castle Bank yet. But that's nice.
Yeah, I mean, we probably should talk about the Pritzkers. That there's like
I know. I forgot there was so much shit like in the early part before to get to them.
Yeah, we should probably skip ahead.
I feel like maybe even like recording more like another day might be. I feel like we definitely can't even get to fucking the second.
We could do
book.
that.
Like
we could record more another day.
Maybe we can start with
part 2 of this.
Okay, yeah, I found the part to start with Helliwell and shit. I guess all my fucking highlights like disappeared, so that's cool. So I can't actually find them.
It's the problem with using what's it called?
The
like
stupid fucking thing. I might just spend the $17 the real book.
When the sky is gray and the moon is gray, I'll be down to get you. Roots of earthly shade, send us your purpose, knocking at your door. Come and take my
realize that this is definitely probably like a 4-part Contra instead of a 2-part, which it already was. For anybody that thinks we've lost the narrative arc, we're finally getting to the kind of the main node here.
Never.
But now, okay, we're at least going to start here talking about the Castle Bank and Trust. So in Chapter 6, it opens quite colorfully. It was spring 1972 when Jaffe received a collateral request for aid and information from IRS intelligence in San Francisco. The subject was Allan George Palmer, also known as Allan Houseman, who was absorbed in the manufacture of LSD and the distribution of it and marijuana in the San Francisco area. Active since 1968, Palmer was a major producer of LSD, mescaline, and THC, and a grass dealer. The IRS still had its narcotics traffickers program. This program utilized a target selection committee to choose individuals for investigation, and it zeroed in on the green-eyed, blonde, and mustachioed Palmer. As part of the government's drive, Palmer and 3 others were arrested in Marin County, California, in October 1971. Federal drug agents watched the conspirators unload about 900 pounds of pot from a private plane at the Oakland airport. Indicted, Palmer skipped out on his trial, after which a no-bail bench warrant was issued for his capture. Now, this is where the connection gets very interesting. Like, I wonder where this LSD dealer in Marin County banked at. I wonder. Jaffe was brought into the Palmer affair because several checks the drug merchant received in May 1970 were drawn by a Bahamian bank on an account it maintained in the American National Bank and Trust Company of Chicago. The Bahamian bank was identified as the Castle Trust Company, Inc. The name was changed in 1972 to Castle Bank and Trust Company Limited. Other slight name changes followed. In common parlance, it is called Castle Bank. The checks worth $22,500 were found in the course of the drug investigation. San Francisco agents requested IRS intelligence in Chicago and Miami to pursue the money. The Chicago agents located the Castle account at American National and the signature card on file. There were 9 names: A. Alapranti, A.R. Bickerton, L.A. Freeman, E.J. Foster, M.S. Gilmore, J.T. Gooding, H.M. Wollstonecroft, Paul L.E. Helliwell, and Burton W. Kanter. The first individual from the signature card list interviewed by the IRS was Chicago attorney Burton Wallace Kanter. A special agent talked with Kanter in March 1972, and the lawyer admitted he had introduced the Castle Trust Company to the American National Bank for the purposes of opening a checking account. Asked about others on the signature card, Kanter indicated Gooding was Castle's president and a personal friend, and that Miami attorney Paul Helliwell was Castle's legal counsel. Kanter explained that he was only an Illinois tax consultant for Castle. He added it was unlikely the private bank would provide the IRS with any information on Palmer. He didn't think he could possibly persuade it to cooperate. Kanter was lying. He and Paul Helliwell were the bank's master builders. They were its principal owners, its primary managers. Castle Bank was their scam, although not their only one. Additionally, both men, but especially Kanter, had direct ties to organized crime. Helliwell's outside interests tended to fall more often within the parameters of the CIA. Burt Kanter was born in New Jersey and Jersey City in the summer of 1930. Illinois, however, was to be his bailiwick. He was educated at the Rockefeller University of Chicago, receiving an undergrad degree in 1951 and an LLB the following year. He became a teaching associate for a couple of years at the University of Indiana Law School. Kanter next clerked for 2 years the Judge Morton P. Fisher of the U.S. Tax Court. Kanter had been a superior student with the potential to be an exceptional lawyer specializing in tax issues. In time, he was admitted to practice before the U.S. District Court, Court of Appeals, Court of Claims, the Tax Court, and the Supreme Court. So he joined the David Altman law firm on South LaSalle Street in Chicago in 1958. The firm concentrated on federal taxation, estate planning, wills, and trusts. It was headed by Altman, who had worked for the IRS in the Chief Counsel's office, and later its Office of Division Counsel from 38 to 43, and other associates had IRS experience, like extensive. So then in 1963, Kanter and Milton A. Levenfeld, another graduate of UChicago Law School, became partners in the law firm. The next year, Kanter and Levenfeld broke from Altman and started their own firm, which I believe is called Kanter and Levenfeld, which became a powerhouse with exceptionally strong IRS connections. When he was contacted in 1972 by the special agent about Castle, the firm had grown in both size and prestige. The senior partners were Kanter, Levenfeld, Charles A. Lippitz, and Roger S. Basks. According to Martindale and Hubble's Directory of Attorneys, there were 15 lawyers working at Levenfeld, Kanter, Basks, and Lippitz in 1972, including Elliot G. Steinberg, who was titled a resident member of the firm practicing in San Francisco. Not listed was Kanter's partner Joel Mallon in Midtown Manhattan. We mentioned him earlier. In the period when Resorts International was created, Kanter, like Mallon, was very active in the Bahamas shaping up Castle Bank. He also was energetically at work in California on one of the largest resort projects in the Golden State. Kanter and Richard K. Janger, a young attorney from his firm, were registered agents for the La Costa Land Company. So I guess that was developing Rancho La Costa, a resort country club complex north of San Diego. And that undertaking also involved racketeer Mo Dalitz, a principal in the Desert Inn, and as mentioned previously, a member of the Cleveland Syndicate. And they were also working with fraudster Allard Rowan, also from the Desert Inn, and like Dalitz, an investor in Meyer Lansky's enterprises, and Clifford Jones, Nevada's former lieutenant governor. I think that's literally a plot in The Godfather, isn't it?
I don't remember.
There's a politician who kills a hooker, and then Mo Dalitz, who I think is Mo Green in The Godfather, gets executed at the beginning of the first movie. He kills a hooker, and the mob covers it up for him. And just might have been inspired by Clifford Jones. Jones's organized crime connections were impeccable. He'd been an original Bank of World Commerce partner. Yeah, then there was a whole connection with the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund with the La Costa Land Company. The whole Jimmy Hoffa sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So Kanter was involved in that. Let's see, just going down here. Oh, yeah, the pension fund loans traditionally went to risky resort ventures involving organized crime. Most of the money dished out in the real estate portfolio went to 7 entities controlled by 3 men with organized crime connections. They were Alan Robert Glick, Morris Schenker, and Al Malnick. Cool. So Kanter basically had access to the pension fund, and that access likely came from Alan Dorfman, a friend and business associate, murdered in 1985 to prevent him from talking about mob investments. Dorfman was an important fund official and racketeer. He was considered by government investigators the primary mover of pension fund loans, particularly after Jimmy Hoffa went to prison. Dorfman was in the same league as Glick, Schenker, and Malnick. So in 1972, the IRS knew little about Castle Bank. There was the Palmer LSD connection, the American National Bank account, names in the signature card, and the little that Kanter told. So they started looking into the American National Bank statements specifying the Castle account. The 1969 and 70 figures show Castle maintained a sizable commercial account. Deposits were as large as $1 million, and several were in the $200,000 to $500,000 range. The account size aroused IRS interest beyond the issue of Palmer's funds. "We are," wrote the Intelligence Division supervisor from San Francisco, "concerned about the source of funds being deposited by Castle Trust Company with the American National Bank in Chicago. Soon it was determined that Castle had accounts at 2 other Chicago banks, Continental Illinois National and First National. There was also evidence that requests from Castle to Chicago ordering cashier's checks were dispersed to associates of organized crime." So, for example, a $70,000 cashier's check was issued to Yale Cohen, a convicted felon and known gambler from Cleveland and Newport, Kentucky, which he received while he was the manager of Stardust Casino and an associate of Chicago mobster Anthony Spilotro, who was shot to death in 1986, et cetera, et cetera. So basically a huge mob operation. Morris Kleinman and the Cleveland mob syndicate were also kind of deeply involved, that kind of rose up during Prohibition, and after appeal, the Cleveland mob joined with Lansky and his Confederates, controlling numerous rackets and businesses. The expanded group was so criminally creative, they formed the core of the most sophisticated national crime syndicate in America. The Kleinman material found in the Castle Bank probe revealed his partnership in a company called Carrot Inc., which operated the Stardust Casino until it was sold in 1969. More importantly, it was detected that Morris Kleinman's attorneys were Burt Kanter and Paul Helliwell. And also, at this time, the IRS discovered just who brought drug dealer Palmer into Castle Bank. The Palmer connection was made by Roger S. Basks, a senior partner in the Kanter firm. In May 1970, he wrote to Castle opening Palmer's account. The instruction from Basks also notified the Bahamian office that a Castle depositor called Seven Seas Brokerage had agreed to lend Palmer's account, number 4084, an additional $10,000 without interest. So there, I mean, you go right there, like you have this kind of mafia, CIA, money laundering in the Caribbean thing, bankrolling acid production in Marin County in 1970, on top of what Billy Mellon Hitchcock was doing, literally bankrolling and rationalizing the industrial process with his two chemists. Mm-hmm. So just very, when people us for talking about aspects of the 60s counterculture being manufactured, like maybe refer back to this as like literally being bankrolled by, and like a bunch of Nazi Hells Angels cultists, like bankrolled by a melon.
No, it's not really questionable. It's pretty apparent.
Yeah, so the original source for the information about Palmer, the LSD guy, was Francis Eugene Poe, who's the president of two small South Florida banks at Perrine and Cutler Ridge, which were affiliated through a holding company, often called the Bank of Perrine Cutler Ridge. Paul Helliwell was the actual boss of both banks, and in addition to Poe's stateside banking, he was also a Castle Bank director. Yeah, so he kind of like Casper, I guess the investigator, kind of like psyoped Poe into helping him out, because he went to him and said, I'm investigating narcotics. The suspect is Palmer, the LSD guy, and Casper asked the banker for assistance. Poe had known Casper for almost 20 years and believed the line that he was working undercover for the Federal Narcotics Bureau. Poe was glad to oblige. With Casper's help, Jaffe determined that Castle, with its own bank accounts in Chicago, South Florida, and New York, was an underground conduit for untaxed money. Through Gene Poe, it was learned that drug merchant Palmer had personally brought some of his money south to the Perrine Cutler Ridge Bank for deposit in a Castle account. Most importantly, Jaffe discovered that Palmer's money never actually left the United States. The cash stayed in the Castle account at Perrine Cutler Ridge. Jaffe thus suspected Castle merely provided bookkeeping services, crediting and debiting accounts in which the funds remained in the States. He wrote, when the depositor requires them again, a debiting entry is made in Nassau with a check or cash paid out by the Miami bank charged only to the Castle trust account, thereby providing the anonymity of the transaction. That Castle was actually operated in the United States was a potentially significant conclusion. It meant that Castle was not really a foreign bank, and myriad criminal charges might follow for the owners as well as depositors. So, the question of Castle's true situs, what is that, Latin?
Location,
true situs, was clearly recognized by the Castle people as soon as the IRS served a summons on the Chicago bank for its Castle records. The response in Nassau was interesting and immediate. Castle's resident managers applied to the Bahamian government for a name change and, more significantly, a general banking license that would at least legitimize transactions for outsiders. This was clearly and patently illegal under the existing Bahamian license, and the applied-for charges would help mask that it was a foreign corporation working on American soil. So they did change their name to Castle Bank and Trust Ltd., but they didn't get the unrestricted banking license they wanted. He writes that Castle Bank had two poles of ownership and management. One was in Chicago with Kanter and his law firm, the other in Miami, where the main force was the stout, chain-smoking, asthmatic Paul Lionel Edward Helliwell, chairman of the Perrine Cutler Ridge Banks, and so Kanter said, counsel to Castle Bank. So a little bit about Helliwell. He's born in Brooklyn in 1914, moved south, I think, as a child, attended the University of Florida, got a law degree from there, and he was in ROTC in its last 2 years in law school, and then went into the military when World War II started. His vocation was military intelligence, and he served in the Army's G2 intelligence group in the Middle East, later transferring to the OSS as Chief of Intelligence in China, commanding 350 Army and Navy personnel and thousands of Asians. In the OSS, founded and directed by William J. Donovan, also correctly credited with being the progenitor of the CIA, Helliwell earned several high decorations. China and Southeast Asia were his prime areas, and there he was involved in matters of great importance. It was Helliwell and members of his OSS group who had contact with Ho Chi Minh during the latter days of the war. Ho Chi Minh and Helliwell had 3 meetings between January and the end of March 1945. Ho asked for arms and ammunition to fight the Japanese. Helliwell refused unless Ho gave categorical assurances the weapons would not be used against the mutually despised French. They deadlocked over the issue and nothing much was done. The only weapons given Ho by the OSS in China were 6 revolvers, personally handed over by Helliwell after Ho's guerrillas rescued American flyers shot down in Indochina.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy hitting position right there.
Right.
Like,
this is the kind of like sus OSS. Well, I guess like he continued to kind of be an intelligence more or less. But, you know, there's obviously degrees of sus lawyers who were formerly in the OSS during World War II.
Sure.
Like
yeah.
Definitely like we can draw clear distinctions between someone who was like basically going to be sent to die and someone who met Ho Chi Minh.
That is true. Yeah, I did notice that. It was going to be
not to overly defend my sus OSS grandfather, who's become famous in some quarters. But yeah, I mean, I'm relieved to report. Well, to my knowledge, no, I really do think there's no involvement on his part in any of this. Although when I read that one thing and All Was Clouded by Desire, the other book by Alan A. Block, talking about how Bill Casey and Rappaport, who I guess he doesn't really become relevant until later, would plan lots of things at Deepdale Golf Club on Long Island. I was like starting to like Google everything, like just make sure. I was texting my parents. I was like, did Grandpa go to Deepdale Golf Club? But no.
They were part of a group called the Hardy Boys.
Yeah, I was like, was Grandpa a Hardy Boy? Was he a Hardy Boy?
I've been drawing some interlock charts, and I thought about doing like a dotted line, like question mark, like Hardy Boy. Like, but like we truly don't know. But I mean, I assume it would be possible that he was at least nominally under the command, maybe, of Helliwell, if he was commanding like the entire Far East Division, I guess, in the org structure. But that's like saying that you served under a general kind of thing. Like,
yes,
like,
that's
it's
true.
Not like he was like his special assistant, like running around with Ho Chi Minh and stuff.
And he was not in a law firm with any of these people. He turned down Wild Bill Donovan's alleged offer to be in his law firm.
Unlike certain relatives
some people
of certain
did not refuse the offer to work in an OSS law firm. Yeah,
like
he
literally
courageously said, "No, Wild Bill Donovan, you're sus. I don't want to be." No, he didn't. It probably was not a matter of principle. It was probably just having like an independent streak and like not wanting to work for somebody else. But the point stands.
Yes. But our eyes are open as we fearlessly open.
Definitely
and vigilant as we go through.
Definitely,
this.
I was definitely checking because since all these people are like sus ex OSS lawyers who like largely worked out of like Long Island. But yeah.
It is amazing though that like some of them definitely did, and it does seem to be like it's the guys who were. That's the other thing about like there's being in the OSS, and then there's like being like a leader in the OSS that like Allen Dulles is meeting with SS generals, like negotiating, like, all right, so how many of you want to come over to America, like and shit, like Bill Casey's like hiding the fucking Yamashita's gold money, and like Edward Lansdale and like and Paul Helliwell's like meeting with Ho Chi Minh. Like these were guys that were already a little older in the OSS, like when World War II was happening, as opposed to like somebody who was like 22, like, like you said, being sent on potential suicide missions. And stuff.
That were
or just
like,
I think even somebody like maybe William Colby, who's like literally parachuting into like Europe to like fight in commando operations, like. He was more like a foot soldier. Maybe that's why they murdered him in the 90s. Yeah, so there's a scale here. But definitely with these older OSS guys, these older OSS heads like Casey, Donovan, and Helliwell. Helliwell is like, I didn't quite appreciate until I read this book, like how high up in the food chain he was during World War II. I thought he was just kind of like a guy who like was in the OSS, but apparently not. Like, and then, after the OSS disbanded, he became the chief of the Far East Division of the Strategic Services Unit of the War Department until the spring of 1946. And that was kind of an interim intelligence unit bridging the gap between the OSS and the CIA, which was created in 1947. So like he ended up being basically running the Far East Division like in the immediate post-war period, like in the military. So, and we always talk about those old China heads too, like, what was it, Ray Klein and stuff, and how I think when we talk more in the near future about the Moonies and Wackel and stuff, like it almost gets into like a Yankee Cowboy CIA kind of rivalry, where it does feel to some extent like the more cowboy CIA types had served in like the Far East Division of the OSS in World War II, and were like China hands, and they were obsessed with like getting Mao out of power and stuff. Whereas a lot of the like dullest kind of European ones were much more like Atlanticist and focused on like doing intrigues in Europe and like preventing the Soviets from like getting a leg up in like European politics and shit like that. I mean, they all were collaborating at the end of the day, but it does feel like it's interesting to note. Because I also think Helliwell, in a way, I mean, I think we'll see it, like, he does kind of span both these worlds of, like, Yankee and cowboy as well. I think that's what we're seeing throughout this whole process. Because Resorts is often, all the Paradise Island shit is usually more tied to, like, Nixon and, like, the Republicans, which they were totally neck deep in it. But we'll see some Democrats, as we always do. We'll see some bipartisanship going on. But anyway, so after Helliwell left the military, he joined a small law firm, Bouvier. I wonder if that's from Jackie's family, by the way. Bouvier, Helliwell, and Clark, specializing in real property, insurance, tax, trade regulation, and similar matters. General corporate law kept the firm modestly busy. The rest of Helliwell's time was taken up by the CIA. In the beginning, his CIA activities centered on Asian problems, brought to mind by the famous and controversial Major General Claire Chennault, known as an acerbic warrior at odds with his superiors for decades. So yeah, actually, Chennault's another one too. He was one of the first exponents of the Southeast Asian domino theory of communist expansion. The doctrine went like this: Mao's victory in China would result in massive communist support for Ho Chi Minh, causing the French to fall in Indochina. Like tipping dominoes, the regimes in Thailand, Burma, Malaya, and perhaps India would topple to the communists. Finally, the Pacific from the Bering Sea to Bali would feel the inexorable pressure of communist imperialism unleashed and unchecked. Chennault had a plan to stop this catastrophe of his own imagination. Through the skillful use of air power, supplying war material to the indigenous anti-communist Chinese, coupled with the employment of American military advisors for training and planning, Chinese communism could be contained, thus saving Southeast Asia. The necessary logistical support would be furnished by certain civilian airlines, such as Civil Air Transport, owned by Chennault and a partner. So yeah, that's one of those like masked CIA airlines. Although there were few takers in Washington for Chennault's plan, even though he had the lobbying help of attorney Thomas G. Tommy the Corcoran, an early FDR brain truster, zealously committed to New Deal policies until he found out how lucrative the other side was. Corcoran was then known for sleazy influence peddling, questionable lobbying tactics, and backdoor deals. Chennault was stymied until his friend Paul Helliwell intervened. It was Helliwell who broke the impasse by suggesting to Frank Wisner, an important CIA official, that he use CAT for Southeast Asian operations. The powerful and well-placed Wisner was in charge of the Office of Policy Coordination, a covert action org somewhat tenuously tied to the CIA, in 1948-49, but entirely within it a few years later. Wisner agreed and requested Helliwell to figure out a clandestine way to subsidize the airline, which was at that moment in desperate financial trouble. So in 49, an agreement was reached and signed by Corcoran for his airline and a CIA representative from the Office of Finance. Helliwell helped construct the CIA's commercial cover organization for the airline and its Southeast Asian covert missions. This was the Sea Supply Corporation, set up in Florida, with its main office in Bangkok, Thailand. In 1952, Helliwell's law firm became general counsel for Sea Supply. The same year, Helliwell was made the general counsel for the Royal Consulate of Thailand. Naturally, the CIA controlled the consulate. Under the stewardship of CIA functionaries such as Helliwell, Sea Supply did far more than cover the CAT operations. It also channeled assistance to the Thai chief of police, who was implicated in the region's extensive opium trade. So there we go, like the Golden Triangle. With Sea Supply's help, the chief built a police force of 42,000 men, which rivaled, most likely surpassed, the Thai army in organization, pay, and efficiency. Helliwell also worked CIA operations in the Caribbean area as early as 1953. In those days, the target was Guatemala and its government, led by President Jacobo Arbenz, which was overthrown by the agency. Helliwell worked closely with the main architects of the Guatemalan coup, which included Wisner and Corcoran, now on the United Fruit payroll as a lobbyist. It was the CAT team, joined by other spies like E. Howard Hunt, which carried out this action far more in the economic interests of the United Fruit Company than the national security interests of the United States. But Helliwell was not yet finished with the CIA. In 1961, a CIA army of Cuban emigres disastrously invaded Cuba at the Bay of Pigs. The operation was an unmitigated failure and an international scandal. Helliwell's role in the affair was that of paymaster. The Bay of Pigs brought together several of the CIA men who had triumphed in Guatemala and formulated much of the Thai campaign. Their common route was the OSS and China under Helliwell's command. See, there we go, the China heads. In addition to his espionage activities during the 50s, Helliwell became a well-known political lawyer. He was among the key organizers for the Republican Party at a time when it was little more than a curiosity in Florida. Helliwell was instrumental in carrying the state for Eisenhower in 1952, thereby contributing to the rise of the National Republican Party in the former solidly Democratic South. Around Florida, Helliwell was called Mr. Republican. The making of Florida's Republican Party also brought Helliwell into close contact with Bebe Rebozo. They became companions and attentive associates from then on. So yeah, I mean, this guy was involved in literally overthrowing the Guatemalan government. He was the paymaster of the fucking Bay of Pigs. Like, it's really kind of amazing, and all this shit in Thailand as well with the opium profits, which, you know, at least kind of went through the 70s and the Vietnam War period. And I will pick a slight bone a little bit with Alan Bloch's framing of the domino theory being like a crazy zany thing, because I feel like everybody says that today. That like the domino theory was like obviously wrong, and like these crazy Republicans like just needed to have land wars in Asia because they were so afraid of the communist menace. But like, look, like we lost Vietnam and like they're not all communists now. But actually, I almost want to say like I don't think they were that wrong about the domino theory. I just think the domino theory was good. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
I mean.
Like, I think it wasn't
obviously
evil.
There's like a certain logic to the domino theory, but also like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it is hard to evaluate because even though we lost Vietnam, you know, the fact is that like there was constant effort being made to like stop the dominoes from falling. So there wasn't really a chance to test the domino theory in like under lab conditions or whatever.
No, for sure. Yeah, it can't really. It's kind of a unfalsifiable theory, but I think if the assumption is that like if we do nothing in Asia, the domino theory will occur. I think that actually might be correct. It's just that I think that would have been like for the better of like humanity and stuff. Like if that did happen, but of course, like absent us like enthusiastically kind of meddling and backing like various like reactionary states or whatever and trying to contain it, the success of it will spread. And, you know, to some extent it did. It spread to Vietnam and to Laos and into Korea, at least somewhat. And maybe because it was a better idea than being like a neo-colonial vassal states of like the West or the French or something. But yeah, nonetheless, they were very committed to that. And I guess Helliwell got kind of like plugged into the Bahama scene because he hired a woman named Mary Jane Melrose, who was a young Republican National Committee woman. They made her a partner, and I think she went to work for DevCo, the development authority in the Bahamas, in 1969. So she was like on the ground kind of watching the development of these like the port and the casino projects and everything, and got in very tight with people like Gerald Goldsmith and some of the politicians who were being paid off. Let's see. So meanwhile, okay, back in the 70s, after they found this shit, so Jaffe, Special Agent Jaffe, has his informant, Sally Woodruff, like digging around for Castle records. Her task was to plot Castle's history, outline its permutations, figure out its connections. Jaffe asked her to focus her research and analytical talents on this mystery bank, and she found out it was formed in Freeport in October 1964. Its officers were nominee shareholders from a Bahamian attorney's office. She noticed, interestingly, a Castle connection to the Mercantile Bank and Trust, which owned one of the 5 shares of Castle stock. And that was technically their parent company. That was the first locally owned bank in Freeport. This is weird for her to say, but she naturally wondered why a bank would form another bank. LOL. Wouldn't they be rivals? Perhaps Castle was really perhaps Castle was really a subsidiary of Mercantile. But then she asked, why would they call it Castle instead of the Mercantile Merchant Bank or something like that? On the other hand, what if they formed Castle for a particular client? Possibly, she thought, but why not run the operation as other banks do through their trust department? Interesting. Maybe one particular client. So she traced this the Mercantile Bank. I guess it came out of the K-Ship Investment Company of Panama and several other companies owned by billionaire D.K. Ludwig, the sus shipping king. However, the paper trail indicated Mercantile was founded by Inge Gordon Mosvold, an extremely wealthy Norwegian shipbuilder. Sally concluded, as did others, that Mosvold was partly fronting for the even richer Ludwig in the mercantile companies. The bank originally was the Mercantile Bank of the Americas Limited, registered in 1962. Yeah, so they had a bunch of shell companies on their board, but she got her critical lead from the 1965 records. They showed Paul Helliwell had become a mercantile director. That made the Castle puzzle part of a Helliwell offshore banking complex, which hooked into various wealthy and secretive types like Ludwig. Sally was unaware at this time that Kanter and Helliwell had known each other since the late 50s, that they had met while working on a deal between a Kanter client and Mosvold, represented by Helliwell. Apparently, they got along well. A few years later, Kanter even opened an account for his mother at Helliwell's Bank of Paris. It is also certain, as Roger Basks later emphasized, that from its founding in 1964, the Levenfeld and Kanter firm worked closely with Helliwell's firm. Moreover, it was Burt Kanter, more so than Helliwell, who was instrumental in Castle's formation. Years after the fact, Kanter revealingly commented, quote, "It was originally organized per instructions for the organization from a client of mine in conjunction with the organization of several companies." When Kanter made these remarks, he was no longer able to remember the name of the local lawyer who did the actual incorporating, and citing the lawyer and client privilege, he would not divulge his client's identity. Speculation held that it was racketeer Morris Kleinman. Interesting. So Sally, the informant, she's putting this together. Her first keys to this riddle were Helliwell and Mercantile. The officers in 1965 for Mercantile were a bunch of random people. But then in 1970, two new officers appeared. Gene Poe was one. The other was Peter A. Tompkins, a Cayman Islands banker. They reflected that Mercantile opened a new branch in the Cayman Islands. And then Sally discovered another Helliwell bank. This was the Bank of the Caribbean Limited, registered in the Bahamas in 1963. Sally spent time running down leads on this bank, hoping information from one Helliwell project would shed light on the others. This particular bank was even more mysterious than most, and ultimately, Sally thought it probably was involved in intelligence matters. It was also in some ways a mirror image of Castle. The Bank of the Caribbean, registered by Mosvold and other mercantile people in 1963, with Helliwell somewhere in the background, was picked up 2 years later by a client of Helliwell's law firm. This was an insurance conglomerate with suspected ties to the CIA in Southeast Asia. I love to be an insurance conglomerate that has ties to the CIA and South. We see you fucking sus insurance people. What, you laundering fucking opium money? Like, what the fuck? So this new bank, what the fuck? It was an insurance. I wish he had named it. Insurance conglomerate with suspected ties to the CIA in Southeast Asia. In 1968, the bank changed name and hand. Its new name was Underwriters Bank Limited, and its directors were people associated with Castle Bank, including Helliwell and Anthony James Tullis Gooding, and May Gilmore and Ernest J. Foster. Gooding was a British subject who had lived in the Bahamas. His business, Gooding & Company, was interwoven with Castle and other related firms, and he was the primary manager for Underwriters Bank. Gooding was also on the Castle signature list found in Chicago. He was subsequently identified by Kanter as Castle's president. Meanwhile, Sally's Castle research indicated Castle was not activated until 1967, when new officers and shareholders came on board. Yeah, and then there were, names that they weren't even sure were, real people that were just sort of, straw man names. They say that, basically from 1967 on, those who owned Castle Bank were engaged in an ongoing fraud, a major criminal conspiracy. The managers of Castle Bank had, first of all, deceived the Bahamian government by creating two wholly fictitious shareholders and bank officers, namely Alapronte and Bebas, likely conjured up by Helliwell and Kanter. Bebas was totally imaginary, according to a close Helliwell associate, Colonel Demetrius Stempatos. I wonder if he was one of the Greek colonels who did a CIA coup in Greece in the 60s. However, a friend since the OSS, Stempatos later worked in the mercantile companies in Helliwell's law office. Stempatos recently remarked that Alapranti may have been a Greek marathon runner before the turn of the century, and if so, was dead for decades prior to the castle's founding. So they just took a name of a Greek marathon runner. Okay, in 1968, the shares owned by this Panamanian company jumped to over 35,000. And the following year, Gene Poe and Columbus Chris O'Donnell became castle officers. Chris O'Donnell, by the way, I think is Huntington Hartford's nephew. Yes, Sally wrote to Jaffe that Castle must have been pleased to land O'Donnell, who was Huntington Hartford's nephew, and probably had some rich contacts for the bank. There we go, nephew magic. O'Donnell's mother was thought to have retained every penny of her inheritance and was considered by the Castle conspirators a, quote, great heiress, unlike her strange, spendthrift brother Hartford. When O'Donnell joined Castle, he was contemporaneously employed by the Deltec International Banking Firm, headquartered in Nassau, a firm listed on the New York Stock Exchange, which was formerly the principal investment banking firm that organized financing for Brazil and Argentina. Around this same period, O'Donnell also went to work for Resorts International as a special assistant to Jim Crosby. O'Donnell was not quite finished with his many pursuits. In 1972, it was reported that he had formed a trust company along with Robert Vesco, a very busy man by all accounts, whose employment record and family connections touched many of the key players and institutions of Bahamian affairs. O'Donnell's first Resorts International assignment was the creation of a private bank called Vortac. This bank was formed to lend money to South American entrepreneurs, similar in that respect to Deltec International, but according to I.G. Davis of Resorts, Vortac never really developed because the advantageous interest rate structure upon which its lending ability rested collapsed soon after the bank was formed. Sally said that Castle had a markedly nervous propensity for change. Like, I've never seen such a restless company. I don't think they ever went a full year without a change of directors. So they're just constantly switching people out. And the IRS starts to basically, by 1972, the end of it, they had 21 identified Castle directors, officers, and shareholders, over half a dozen Castle commercial accounts in American banks, several organized crime associations and foreign narcotics targets, many prominent U.S. citizens involved in stock transfers to Castle, which then acted as their trustee, and 6 American brokerage and investment companies which paid Castle dividend income. So the IRS intended to start a grand jury investigation in the very near future. So they start to circle around this shit. And let me see, the story here about Gene Poe accidentally fucks up and gives them a chance to go through the files of Castle. Yeah, Casper did find the name Richard Nixon on the Castle depositor list, but
we should adjourn this portion, I guess, before we go on a long thing, because you're right, winding down in terms of time, since we're going to have to
we have
do another part. Another 2 parts, probably. Anyway,
I think
this
will
probably be 2 parts, and then the next parts.
That'll probably
we
be
definitely
2
will,
parts.
because we started off this episode talking about how this had to do with Pritzker and did not mention him at all after that. So definitely this will have to be part of. So there will have to be another part of this current episode during which I'm speaking. Sorry, I have COVID this week, or I did have it this week. I guess I still have it. I'm dealing with the long haul COVID symptoms, aka the couple of days after you have COVID, or the really bad experience of COVID anyway. Mm-hmm. But
we didn't quite get to.
We're gonna have to do another part of this current episode that I'm speaking during that involves Pritzker, because that's how the episode began, and that was the promise of it at the beginning.
Well, we did it kind of backwards. That usually we'll kind of riff about things in the final hour of the show, but we just started off doing that. So
yes, that is
and
true.
I think the urge to be exhaustive.
We have definitely definitely it's a phenomenon where we are an hour into the show, and we're okay, where should we begin? But yeah, in this case, we kind of, what really, but I see what you're saying, because what really bit us in the ass was that we tried to kind of have structure, where it would sort of loop back around to where we had begun, but because of that, it actually seems
sometimes
even
you
less
can't
structured.
do that You can't do that in 5 hours, though. I mean, we're circling.
Sometimes you can't do that in 5 hours. A mere
we're
5 hours.
We're circling the French arc on the interlock. Like, it will all connect back. We're coming close to the point where this book does mention that the single largest, just to maybe so people don't walk away completely empty-handed.
Right.
The single biggest trust that was like had a depositor account in this very shady bank, Castle Bank, was the Pritzker family in like the 1970s. In fact, not only that, but one of the two principals in this bank, Burton Kanter, the Chicago tax attorney, would go on to have a relationship with the Pritzker family for literally decades. I don't know if I can say for sure. Maybe we'll find out by next time. If he still has a financial connection to managing... Well, no, sorry. Burton Kanter is dead, so he died in the early 2000s, but he managed Pritzker money until the end of his life in the early 2000s. And his law firm, his final law firm that, morphed into what it is today, managed Pritzker wealth, like beyond that. And because the family has sort of splintered a little bit, it's sort of unclear if maybe some people broke off and, went elsewhere. But like the protégés of Burton Kanter continued to manage the Pritzker trusts. And I think we could safely assume, we'll see more as we go through the rest of this book, that the tactics that were used, like the structures that were set up by Helliwell and Kanter, do continue to be used to this present day, to the point where I think I saw in one, maybe it was a Forbes article, that Burton Kanter engaged in like a long-running battle, like a lawsuit with the IRS around the estate taxes that the Pritzkers had to pay. Mm-hmm. And I think they basically, he was able to win. And I think this article estimated that he maybe saved them about it was somewhere between $100 and $150 million in estate tax, like inheritance tax liabilities. He was able to duck and beat for them. So literally all that money, all that magic money that JB and Tom and Nick and Penny and all the Pritzkers are sprinkling around the country, bankrolling all kinds of things these days. Part of that comes from Burton Kanter's magic in helping them systemically avoid paying inheritance taxes through all these shell companies that are also completely intermingled with international drug trafficker and intelligence agency susness in an intimate way. We got a lot of good info in here on the the Meyer Lansky stuff, which I feel like that it's important to lay the groundwork for this because I think sometimes it doesn't click for people. Like when you talk about you were a lawyer for a billionaire or you were a business partner with a CIA OSS covert ops sus lord.
Yeah.
Well, so what? That doesn't mean that and.
As we just said, there's degrees. There's definitely degrees, and the way that the actual practicalities of what was going on, what these people actually were complicit in doing, and
it's not
it's the actual institutions that were that they engaged in doing those things.
And the power relationships. I mean, I think that it's one thing if you're working for Pritzker directly and then you're out shilling for Pritzker kind of thing. I would disagree with that ethically, but it at least makes sense.
Right, yeah.
But I think to sort of behave as if this stuff is not worth focusing on or it's not interesting, I think no matter what way you cut it, that is an op. Whether the person saying that realizes it or not. I'm just imagining an imaginary debate with the socialist for Pritzker guy and dropping kind of all this Castle Bank shit on him.
We don't need Pritzker versus Biden. We need Dimitri versus whoever runs the socialist for Pritzker account about
the only time I'll go on
whether
Twitch.
It's relevant. Sorry, what's the subject of the debate?
Well, I'm just saying that do you think it's interesting and relevant that the Pritzker family had their wealth managed by this CIA mafia mafia, like sus lord bank in the Bahamas, and they've been caught, like even up to this day, I think in the Panama Papers, like J.B. Pritzker has shell companies in the Bahamas and like Panama, like they're still doing it, you know. So
well, if I were in the sort of position of Alan Dershowitz, like for Hillary Clinton playing Donald Trump, or like Herman Cain playing Barack Obama for McCain or whatever.
Oh, we'll get that.
It wasn't Herman Cain. Was it Ben Carson? I feel like it was someone very weird who played one of those like few like nationally visible black Republicans. But yeah, if I were in that position, my response would be he a big boy, it whips ass, $15 minimum wage.
We're going to find out just how much ass they were able to whip, like without ever paying taxes on any of it. It's just, it's fucking, I feel like it's imperative. We're still sketching the interlock charts, but this is all going to kind of bleed into events in the like the later 1980s with like drug trafficking, and the 1990s, and you can even see there's even more stuff with the kind of 60s cultural shit. We haven't even talked about Creedence Clearwater Revival yet. My God, that's literally that's like one of the most outrageous like Burt Kanter schemes in this whole book. We want to do it justice, but Creedence Clearwater shows up on a Mark Lombardi interlock chart for a reason, because through an intermediary, they were introduced to Burt Kanter, who like he set up a bunch of like shell company things to like invest all of their earnings through like Castle Bank, and it was fucking bizarre. It was also connected to like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and shit. I'm just like, I'm so past anybody that's trying to tell me like the LSD phenomenon was like totally organic. At this point.
Was, it's and so that op is still going on. We're seeing like phase 2 now. That's a different whole other topic, but you can definitely project it back into time because you can certainly see how that is occurring today, like with
exactly
the legalization of psychedelics, like the sort of developing industry around psychedelics, the connections to like all these weird cults, even around the Utah thing, which hopefully we'll talk about. Like the salience of psychedelics and that.
Well, guess which governor I think just like expanded like weed legalization all across his great state.
Wow.
The big boy himself.
Wow. Awesome. Except like none of that ever like comes with anything that would like nothing, all the damage that was done. Like I agree that like there's like been great injustice like perpetrated under the auspices or under the aegis of weed being criminalized, like, but none of that is like ever rectified. If he like forgave like all marijuana offenders in Chicago for the past like 20 years or something, that would be like, wow, this guy J.B. Pritzker has some innovative ideas, like legalizing marijuana. Like literally,
well, he might have done that because that's becoming a trendier like thing to do is to like wipe records of people. I forget if like Newsom might have done that.
Well,
I mean that's like, kind of like the damage. A lot of the damage has already been done, so it's kind of just like okay. But
and I also like am skeptical. Yeah, a lot of the damage is done, and I'm also skeptical that like in whatever way Gavin Newsom did that, or that like if maybe Pritzker did that, then it like wasn't actually what I was intending to describe, but
I know what you mean.
I'm
like
pretty confident, that it was like some kind of like means tested, like weird thing where like you have to like pay into the system and then you can get a rebate on all the years you went to jail for smoking weed, like while every single white person like just smoked it all around you on the street. It's like obviously like a stupid thing. Like all these, we should stop, but like all these fools just like love smoking weed, and that's like what they care about. Like all these like New York, LA media people, they love being able to go to a dispensary and be like, do you want like crystal whatever?
I mean it's fine, it's not the biggest thing either way, but yeah, like I'm way past the era of like holding it, like if like that's not surprising to me anymore. If somebody advocated that in like 2005, that would have been and it's really fringe political belief, but now everyone's doing it, so it's again like
also,
how much credit
can
do you
we
really
say that it improves society? Like, I'm not.
No. Okay, we're not gonna. I know. We're not gonna just go on a weed tirade and like.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, I get it because, like, obviously the criminalization is harmful and, like, the people who suffer under it, like, are usually, like, marginalized people or poor people, like, and everyone who, you know, they get off completely and it basically is, for all intents and purposes, legal for certain people, which is the case with many things. But, like, is this such a great thing that we need to be like, wow, what a left-wing move? Like, not really. It's like a huge industry. Like, all the fucking alcohol companies, like, are going to get in on it. Like, you know, it's like
there's absolutely nothing in any of these like things that he's supported that would stand out as like anything different from what Democrats already are kind of. I guess their big distinction is that he's actually doing them, which is like, is he though? Is anyone checking if he's like is anyone checking on the impact of like new laws that he's signed? Like, politicians say they've passed a law that will provide X amount of things all the time, and then it doesn't really pan out that way. So it's like weird. It's like cope mixed with like irony poisoning, mixed with maybe you're getting bankrolled by the Pritzker Foundation or something. At this point, I mean, you know, he is the money bags of like the Democratic Party right now. And so our people, you know, but there's been plenty of talk about teal bucks, but like, what about Pritzker bucks? I think if you're acting in a way that feels like J.B. Pritzker is like covertly paying you, maybe you should like pause and reflect upon your like political position if you call yourself a socialist.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair? Maybe. But, you know, we still have yet to like peel back the big boy onion of like, what does this guy actually believe in? Because I think we could probably deduce certain things about his worldview by looking at like what he's thrown a substantial inherited fortune at, you know, over the years and what he's invested in. So
wow, I'm just reading about, you're right, there actually is an aspect to this that involves expunging the records of people with low-level marijuana arrests and convictions. Here's how it works. So those with arrests for less than 30 grams will have their records cleared through law enforcement and the Illinois State Police. And those with convictions up to that amount will have their records referred to the Prisoner Review Board, which will make an expungement recommendation to the governor. And then if you had more than 30 grams, you have to file for expungement through a petition to the courts and a complex, quote-unquote, motion to vacate process. So, wow.
Wonderful.
Amazing. By the way, like 30 grams is like an ounce.
Yeah, that's an ounce of weed. Like, especially if you got caught in the 90s, like weed was way less strong. So like having an ounce was like not as like big a deal. Like, but you still get... It's just like, you know, sorry for like the 30-year Iran-Contra drug war that we, like, counterinsurgency campaign we waged on you, South Chicago. Here's a little bit of, we'll take the black mark off your record now, like, if you go through a complex legal process. Or it's funny how it gets routed to, like, government
just get,
order.
Like, jammed up for, like, a long-ass time.
I bet you he'll do photo ops for some of it.
We need to, like, you know, just really think over this, you know. There's a lot of complexities going on here, I mean, after all.
Well, you know, we said he was a big boy. And this has been a big episode.
Boy.
It's too big to contain for one full afternoon recording block of SJ. So I think sometime in the next week, we're going to have to like circle back to like round 2, which we're going to get full into. That's where we're going to drop a lot of the real meat of the deliciously seasoned Chicago meat. We're going to get into the
Chicago deep
on
dish.
The table. Yeah. Exactly. And we're gonna see. I think we're both gonna see the fantastic career of Burton Kanter, and the fantastic rise and splintering and growth of the Pritzker fortunes, and to what ends they deployed those fortunes, both economically and politically, just over the last like 15 years. Because I mean, there's things we haven't even touched on yet, like Obama. Because guess what family bankrolled Barack Obama as a young Chicago politician, you know, all the way up to the top in 2008. Starts with a P.
Yeah.
But you don't hear about that anymore, right? I mean, you know, wasn't O'Bungler a disappointment to, you know, the Bernie left? Like, but who bankrolled him? Oh. Who was the chair, I think, of like maybe the national chairperson of like Hillary Clinton's 2008 campaign? J.B. Pritzker. So... There's more, and Gavin Newsom too, but we will take some big bites out of that a few days from now. But now we have to leave you dangling on the edge of your seats.
Yeah.
that will break because you're such a big boy or something.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. You're really good at this. You should
I know. I can't see. It's a mind virus. Like, no, fuck this. No, fuck being ironic. Fuck the Pritzkers.
I was being ironic just now and saying that you were good at these big boy jokes. I didn't think that made it.
We're lost. We're lost in the wilderness of irony.
All right.
Oh God. All right. Well, we're gonna leave it there hanging for now. But until next time, dear listeners, stay vigilant.
Peace.